Bonjour tout le monde.
Good morning, everyone. I call this meeting to order. Welcome to meeting number 143 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Public Accounts.
Are attending in person in the room and remotely using the Zoom application. Before we begin, I'd like to ask all in-person participants to read the guidelines written on the updated cards on the table regarding the translation system. These measures are prevented to help prevent audio and feedback incidents and to protect the health and safety of all participants, including and especially the interpreters. You'll also notice a QR code on the card which takes you to a short video should you be interested. A reminder to all those in person online that for the safety of our interpreters, it is very important that your microphone is muted when you are not speaking. Merci à tous pour votre coopération.
Thank you for your cooperation.
It should be addressed to the chair. Conformément à l'article 108.3G du règlement, le comité reprend l'examen du rapport 6.
Pursuant to Section 1083G of the Standing Orders, the committee resumes its study of Report 6, Sustainable Development Technology Canada, of the 224 reports, 5 to 7 of the Auditor General of Canada.
Technology Canada. Marta Morgan, Board Director, thank you for coming in this morning. You have 5 minutes for an opening remarks. The floor is now yours, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would like to recognize that I'm speaking to you today on the traditional lands of the Anishinaabe Algonquin Nation. I joined the Board of Sustainable Development Technology Canada on June the 4th, 2024, alongside fellow board members Paul Booth and Cassie Doyle. Together, we bring a long track record of public service experience to our one-year appointments to the board. Lorsque nous avons été nommés, le ministre de
When we were appointed, we were given a three-part mandate by the Minister of Innovation, Science and Economic Development. First, to implement the recommendations of the Auditor General. Second, to restart funding for Canadian clean technology companies, both those previously approved for funding and new applicants. And 3, to transition SDTC programming and staff to the National Research Council.
It has been informed by extensive and comprehensive reviews completed over the past year, including the Auditor General's report, the McCarthy-Tetreault report, and the Conflict of Interest and Ethics Commissioner's reports. From the outset, the Board has been in close contact with the Office of the Conflict of Interest and Ethics Commissioner. We have reviewed the contribution agreement and the organization's implementing legislation. Our focus since day one has been on ensuring that SDTC is governed and operated with the highest level of oversight. Dès le premier jour, nous avons veillé.
Specifically, we've worked to ensure that SDTC maintains the highest standards in the management of public funds.
SDTC maintains the highest standards in the management of public funds, ensures fairness for the clean tech companies that rely on SDTC support to develop sustainable technologies in Canada, and successfully transitions the deep expertise that has been developed at SDTC since its founding in 2001 to the National Research Council. Since our appointment in June, we have been working on all three components of our mandate. First, we were tasked with implementing the Auditor General's recommendations. Out of 11 recommendations, 10 have been fully implemented. This includes enhanced documentation of the approval process, increased reporting to ICED, and enhanced management and disclosure of conflicts of interest. The final recommendation is currently being addressed through an independent process overseen by the Board. Further to this, SDTC has fully complied with Parliament's order for production of papers, providing over 10,000 documents. Second, we were mandated to restart funding for Canadian clean tech companies. To this end, we have initiated a third-party review of previously approved projects to ensure compliance with the eligibility requirements. This work is still ongoing, and no funds have been dispersed in the interim. We expect that funding could be dispersed shortly to companies where no eligibility issues were identified by the Auditor General. In addition, we are prioritizing cases where payment is due to companies who have fulfilled all of the requirements under their agreements and where funding has been paused. Finally, we were tasked with transitioning SDTC programming and staff to the National Research Council. As Minister Champagne stated in his June 4th announcement, the employees' dedication and hard work will ensure the continued success of our clean tech startups in Canada. This process is well underway, with working groups from both SDTC and the NRC actively identifying areas of alignment in programming and personnel to ensure a smooth transition. Allow me to conclude with a personal reflection. Throughout my time in the federal public service, I saw the potential for innovative Canadian companies to drive economic growth, productivity, and job creation for Canadians. I'm hopeful that the transfer of programming of SDTC to the NRC will enable the NRC to continue to support innovative Canadian companies. Our board will continue to focus on enhancing accountability, transparency, and integrity as we move forward with this mandate. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you very much, Ms. Morgan. We'll now begin our first round. It consists of 4 members with 6 minutes each. Mr. Perkins, you have the floor for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Ms. Morgan, for coming today. Have you, as an acting board member, I think that's the correct title of SDTC, have you had any meetings since you've been appointed to this position with the Minister of Industry or his office?
No, we have not.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to talk a bit about the review of the projects that's ongoing. It's one of your 3 areas. You mentioned that you're reviewing the projects identified for the Auditor General for eligibility. Has the, to your knowledge, has the Auditor General been back at all at SDTC looking at a broader list of transactions rather than just the 226 she looked at?
No, not to my knowledge.
She hasn't. So the Auditor General's then report stands, which was during the audit period that she reviewed 226 of 420 transactions approved by the board.
That's correct, and one of her recommendations was that we review individually each of the projects that was undertaken during that audit period, and that is what we have. That is a process that we have started.
You're focused on the 226 transactions that were that were mentioned and discussed in the audit, not the 420 in the audit period.
We are focused on all of the projects that were put in place during the period of the audit. So I believe that the Auditor General took a sample of projects and reviewed them, but we are reviewing all of those projects, all of the projects.
Right. So that, yes, according to the Auditor General's report, that's 420 projects. So you're reviewing them all for eligibility? For eligibility,
yes, as per the recommendation of the Auditor General.
And when you look at the eligibility, besides the, I'm presuming you're talking about eligibility relative to the contribution agreements.
Yes, that's correct.
Are you looking at eligibility relative to conflict of interest?
We're looking at eligibility. We're following the Auditor General's recommendation, which was to review every project for eligibility, and we have hired independent firms to assess. 2 individuals, independent, will assess each project for eligibility, and that's per the Auditor General's recommendation.
That's true, but as a person overseeing the governance of this organization, I would think that you would be more concerned overall, not just with the eligibility, but the overall issues that have been identified in the culture of conflict of interest in the organization, at the board and in management, and most of those management are still there. In the culture of conflict of interest, the 226 projects that the Auditor General audited out of the 420, 82% of them were conflicted. 82% of board member approved transactions were conflicted by board members. To me, that goes to an eligibility issue as well, because there are no way those 9 directors represented 82% of the clean technology community in Canada. So are you explaining to me that the board and the review that's going on with the third party isn't delving into the issue at all of the conflicts of interest that were identified, and whether or not these companies got preferential treatment because of their connection with board members? That's not part of the review?
Mr. Chair, a number of the recommendations of the Auditor General were related to strengthening the conflict of interest provisions of SDTC, and those recommendations have been implemented. The board is overseeing the governance of SDTC, and we're doing that with much strengthened conflict of interest reporting provisions going forward. In terms of the eligibility reviews, we're following the advice of the Auditor General, which is to review each project for eligibility.
But the whole reason we're here, and the whole reason we have a production of documents motion that got approved by the majority of the House of Commons members of Parliament to be collected, unredacted, is that in that audit period, those 420 transactions approved by board members, that represents $856 million of taxpayer money. The Auditor General only looked at half of that and found $330 million were conflicted and $59 million was ineligible. That's almost $400 million of $800 million was conflicted or spent incorrectly. So it boggles my mind that in trying to clean up the governance that the minister said was his goal, with transferring it, getting rid of the board, having a new board, that part of that process is saying, look, folks, these projects have a problem. They are conflicted. These board members, like, the project may be legitimate, but how they got in and how they got funding was clearly preferential treatment over that of other businesses in the clean technology space that didn't get funding. And for that not to be part of the review boggles my mind. So will you commit here that you will mandate to that third party that you have doing it to ensure that conflict of interest, which was a big part of the Auditor General's report, is part of your review?
Mr. Chair, we have independent advice on conflict of interest and provisions of the SDTC. And as we go forward, we will be taking advice on conflict of interest issues as well, particularly as we look at reviews and as we look at restarting funding for projects.
Thank you very much. Turning out to Ms. Yip, you have the floor for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Ms. Morgan, for coming this morning to answer our questions. So, Ms. Doyle, you are among 3 new board members by SDTC to lead the transition into the National Research Council. What are your qualifications?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a long career in the public service, about 35 years of experience in a number of departments, as well as some experience in the private sector. So that brings a lot of knowledge and understanding around public sector governance and management.
Do you have any governance experience?
Well, by leading very large public sector organizations with, for example, at Global Affairs Canada, 12,000 employees and over $8 billion in annual funding, there is considerable governance responsibilities that goes along with that.
So you're able to parlay your past experiences into helping with the current issues faced by the board?
I hope to be able to bring that experience to the issues at hand.
So how did the Auditor General define eligibility?
Well, the Auditor General looked at eligibility, I think, based on how projects had been assessed, based on the contribution agreement that was in place between ISED and SDTC. And
how did SDTC understand eligibility?
SDTC also understood eligibility based on the contribution agreement between ISED and SDTC, as well as guidance and guidelines that were developed in order to assist in interpretation of the eligibility criteria in the contribution agreement.
The RCMP commissioner told the media last week there was an ongoing investigation into SDTC. Earlier this summer, in a letter to the House Clerk and the committee, the RCMP stated they were looking into potentially starting an investigation and had not started one. I'm sorry, if we could just, lower the volume. Yeah, sorry, I'm just having a bit of trouble.
Sorry,
If you
order,
don't mind,
order.
please.
Gentlemen, we don't comment on the questions that members are asking, and I would ask that we try not to disturb the questions that are going on. Ms. Yip, I stopped the clock. You have 3.5 minutes. Time's yours again.
Thank you. I'll just repeat what I was just going back a little bit. The RCMP stated that they were looking into potentially starting an investigation and had not started one. They had also received no referral from the Auditor General, as she found no evidence of criminal wrongdoing at the organization or by any individual. Has the RCMP reached out to the current SDTC board in this regard?
The new board has not been contacted by the RCMP.
Has the RCMP reached out to you personally?
I have not been contacted by the RCMP.
Okay. So Ms. Doyle, in her testimony last week, confirmed that the 3 new board members appointed on June 4th are conflict-free, and that the 3 of you met with the Ethics Commissioner as part of your appointment.
Chair, we have been briefed by the Office of the Conflict of Interest and Ethics Commissioner. We have also met with the Independent Ethics Advisor at SDTC, and I do not have any conflicts, financial interest, or investments in any clean tech companies.
Okay. And the other 2 are conflict-free?
To my understanding, the other 2 as well. I think you've had them both here.
Ms. Doyle confirmed that SDTC has implemented 10 out of the 11 Auditor General recommendations and is in the process of implementing the final, the one in the project review. Can you speak to the project review process? What is the process like?
Yes, we have initiated a process to independently review each of the projects that were put in place during the time period of the audit. We've brought on board independent reviewers, and each project will be independently reviewed separately by 2 independent reviewers before it is considered by the board.
Okay. And has there been any main challenge faced on the project review process?
The project review process has started, and we know that we have a lot of work to do before the end of the year to get it finished, because there are quite a lot of projects, but it is underway, and we are working hard on it.
So you mentioned that 2 people are reviewing each project?
2 separate individual reviewers will review each project.
And could you elaborate a little bit more on that?
Well, we've brought on board independent reviewers, and they will look independently at each project vis-a-vis the eligibility of that project, which is the outstanding recommendation of the Auditor General, and then they will provide their independent recommendations regarding the eligibility of the projects, and then the board will take appropriate action based on the outcomes of those reviews.
And so these reviewers have appropriate background?
Yes, we've asked for reviewers that have technical expertise as well, because that is one of the things that the Auditor General noted in their report that would be important for a good quality review. Needs to look at all of the aspects of every project to make sure that it is eligible as a good, solid, sustainable development technology project.
Thank you. That is the time. Suivant, next, c'est Madame Sinclair.
Now we will hear from Ms.
6 minutes, s'il vous plaît.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Bonjour, Madame Morgan. Pouvez-vous tout simplement me confirmer qu'aucune entreprise ne reçoit de financement de la part de TDDC?
Juste une petite seconde, Madame Sinclair.
Just a moment. Do you hear now? Yes, very good. Thank you. Could you just start again, Ms. Sinclair-Desgagnés? You have 6 minutes. Ms. Morgan, could you please confirm that no company has received SDTC since the beginning of 2024?
I'm not quite sure I understand the question. I think no company has received funding from SDTC. Oh, yes. Well, Mr. Chair, funding for SDTC has been paused since last October.
C'est une question par oui ou par non. Toutes les entreprises.
Yes or no, please. So no company whatsoever has received any funding from you at all? None. Not even those who already had contribution agreements, who are already within the process. None has received a single penny from SDTC since the beginning of this year.
Mr. Chair, as I've only been appointed to the board as of June, I would be happy to seek clarification on that, but my understanding is that funding has generally been paused, although there may have been a very small number.
Morgane, je vous demanderais de nous vérifier parce que c'est quand même très, très important.
Absolument.
Juste une toute petite seconde. Alors, est-ce que ça marche, Madame Morgan?
Oui, ça marche mieux.
Is it working? Yes, it's working better.
Your remarks, if you could be as precise as possible when responding to you and your team, to Madame Sinclair-Dingay, that'd be helpful. Madame Sinclair-Dingay, vous avez 5 minutes 10 secondes.
You have 5 minutes, 10 seconds left. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Have you yourself examined a contribution agreement between companies and SDTC, the type of contract? Have you personally gone over these now that you've been there for 4 months on the board? Have you examined in detail what contributions are, what the agreements are?
Mr. Chair, I have familiarized myself with the legislation, the updated contribution agreement, and am receiving independent advice on the contribution agreements.
D'accord, je vous pose la question entre un
Very good, but I'm asking you about, a standard agreement between a company and either ISED or SDTC, the funding agreements.
As a board member, I have not personally reviewed individual contribution agreements with companies, but I have reviewed the general eligibility criteria
Parfait, merci beaucoup.
and will be...
Fine, that's fine. Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Morgan. I have a lot of questions and little time. So, are you aware that within these contracts, there is a clause to the effect that the agreement or contract cannot be terminated unless the company has misrepresented itself. So if the error is on SDTC's side, it can't lead to an end of contract. So a company that has erroneously received funding will continue to receive funding, taxpayers' funding, even though it's not their error, it's SDTC, a conflict of interest on their side, or an admissibility issue from SDTC. Were you aware of this?
Mr. Chair, we have established a clear process to review every single project on an individual basis, and decisions around funding and the restart of funding will only be made once each of those individual reviews.
Fine. So I've got another question. I'll put the question differently. The Auditor General identified a number of projects that are not eligible. Do you ask the consultants who are looking them over to review even the projects that were thought to be eligible by the Auditor General?
Mr. Chair, yes, the Auditor General recommendation was that all of the projects be reviewed.
Donc, si la
All right, fine. So the Auditor General.
vérificatrice générale.
So if the Auditor General explicitly wrote that a project was not eligible, it would be possible that consultants look at it and decide that it was eligible, so the consultants would have priority over the Auditor General's opinion?
Mr. Chair, the Auditor General, in their recommendations, recommended that we undertake separate individual reviews.
Fine. So, which decisions? If the Auditor General said that a certain project was ineligible and the consultants say that it is, who will you be listening to?
Once we've followed the process and reviewed every individual project, the board will take the required action based on the...
Fine, but that's not the question, Ms. Morgan. Will it be the consultants, their decision, their view, or the Auditor General's view that will override the other as to whether a project is eligible or not?
Vous êtes sur le conseil d'administration, c'est à vous.
And you're on the board. It's just up to you to answer.
The board will take whatever action is appropriate based on the results of the various reviews that have been done. We are being guided by the recommendations of the Auditor General reviews in the way that we are reviewing each of the projects.
Donc, vous confirmez.
All right, so you confirm then that SDTC will not listen what was explicitly written in the report, the Auditor General's report, as for ineligible or eligible projects, and could make another decision based on the advice of these consultants that a project will continue to be funded, even though the Auditor General will have explicitly specified that that project was ineligible.
Mr. Chair, we're following a clear project that's based on the recommendation of the Auditor General, which was to review every project individually.
Yes, fine, but her recommendation, was, yes, but like, look, but her recommendation wasn't to not listen to what she had identified already, because she did identify a number of ineligible projects. So her recommendation certainly wasn't, oh, why don't you check and see if they're all eligible? Go check it yourself. Her recommendation was, these are ineligible, and we'd now ask you to check all the others because, she took a sample. I mean, let's not go back to statistics, but a sample means that only some of them were ineligible and all the others should be checked as to their eligibility. It's not to disagree. It's not an invitation to disagree with my analysis. I mean, the Auditor General's analysis. I think this is a very sad state of affairs. Now let's continue.
Si des projets sont quand même jugés inéligibles.
So, if projects are found to be ineligible, and the Auditor General and the consultants, let's say, agree on this, on the basis of the clause specifying that the agreement cannot be terminated, do you confirm that the ineligible projects will nevertheless continue to be funded because you can't, tear up the agreement?
Mr. Chair, we've established a very clear process.
Madame, arrêtez de répéter la même cassette.
Look, stop playing the same tape. I mean, you're not answering my question.
In any case where we find evidence of fraud or wrongdoing on the part of the recipient, the board will take applied action.
Exactement.
Well, that's the point, isn't it? That's the point. So if the company hasn't done anything wrong, they just, applied, there was money there, they applied for it, the problem is on SDTC side. So you're telling me that the agreements won't be terminated because the error is on SDTC's side. And that's a fundamental error in the way the agreements were drawn up, and now you're confirming it. So companies found to be ineligible will continue to receive funding.
Si vous avez des commentaires, non, merci beaucoup. Suivant, next is Mr. Desjardins. You have the floor for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Ms. Morgan, for being present with us in this committee. As you're aware, the issues at SDDC have large implications in our country. One, the very serious issue of conflict of interest that now Canadians have had to deal with and grapple with and try to understand how could an agency as large as SDTC fall victim to such an audit, fall victim to conflict of interest, and fall victim to board mismanagement. These are serious concerns that Canadians have that have an incredible damage of public trust. Being a civil servant for as long as you have, I'm sure you're aware that if we don't have public trust in our institutions, even our ministries, the work of actually trying to make these policy objectives, which are actually quite good policy objectives, trying to create innovation amongst Canadians, trying to make sure that Canada has a role globally, that we can remain competitive with our technology, our science, and our innovation. It's all compromised, of course, in this really important goal and that policy objective, and of course Canadian taxpayers' money as well, but also the very real issues related to the climate crisis. We've done a disservice now to many factors, and so that's why we're present here today, and that's why you're present here today to speak to us in the way that you'll be handling the transition from SDDC to the NRC. On June 4th, a press release by Minister Champagne says, to support this transition process, the government has named a new SDDC board chairperson and 2 new directors who will lead the SDTC in the transfer of its programming to the NRC. These former public servants bring with them the experience required to direct SDTC and its programming transitions to the NRC. And you're one of these 2 board members, correct?
Yes, I am.
Can you please describe your roles and responsibilities at SDTC, how many hours you put in?
As a board, we are overseeing the governance and leadership of the organization. Our key role is to implement the mandate that we were given by the Minister of ISED, which is to implement the Auditor General's report first and foremost, to move forward to restart funding for clean tech companies in Canada, and also to transfer the people and the programming of the NRC to, of SDTC to the NRC. That is our primary function.
And do you have any specific roles yourself? in this process?
We are all sort of jointly accountable as a board, but I have been spending a bit more time on issues related to the transfer to the NRC.
And what's your compensation for being a board member?
We are compensated at a daily rate based on a deputy minister salary. It's about $1,500 a day.
Have you had to recuse yourself from any decisions during your time on the board thus far, and if so, why?
Mr. Chair, out of an abundance of caution, I did recuse myself from one board discussion. It was related to a procurement where a decision had been made by staff, but out of an abundance of caution, I recused myself entirely from the decision. I have no conflicts with respect to clean tech companies in Canada.
And what was the nature of that conflict, sorry?
It was related to a procurement where the staff had made a decision,
and you were the
it was
overseeing...
being reported to the board, and so I just recused myself from the decision.
I understand. Have you had any conflict of interest training prior to your appointment at SDDC and during your time at SDDC?
We have had a full briefing by the Conflict of Interest Commissioner's Office, as well as by our independent Conflict of Interest and Ethics Advisor.
Do any companies of which you were an owner or a member of a board receive SDDC funding?
No.
Did any companies which your family or friends owned or members of the board receive SDDC funding?
No.
Thank you very much, Ms. Morgan, for answering those questions. It's really important that we establish why you're on the board, your credibility on the board, towards the ends I described at the very beginning. So thank you for your cooperation. I do want to now transition to a very serious issue that we had received relative to your opening statement as well, the TETRO report, McCarthy TETRO report. In that report, of course, it suggests it was a solution in some ways of the government to try to identify whether or not there was credibility to some serious HR concerns that were made aware by the government. It was present to us in this committee where we had an individual, the whistleblower. We identified them in this committee as Witness 1. Witness 1 had testified at this committee that there was serious and long-standing issues with human resource management within SDDC. Some of those abuses stemmed to very deep issues of systemic violence like racism and homophobia, sexism. There are really serious issues related to the treatment of employees at SDTC. Within the report, of course, or prior to the report being commissioned by the government, there was many NDAs, non-disclosure agreements, that were signed by employees, former employees, or even current employees of SDTC. And he had stated, the whistleblower that is, that these NDAs had limited the ability of employees to be truthful and fully transparent in the work related to the McCarthy TETRO report. Do you understand what the whistleblower is saying here, and can you see that there's an obvious conflict between the ability to testify to one's own truth experience while also being held to an NDA? Do you understand that conflict?
Mr. Chair, these allegations were comprehensively investigated by McCarthy TETRO, and their report is a matter of public record. McCarthy TETRO had complete access to all current and former employees, and they have published a comprehensive report which will guide us along with the report of the Auditor General and the report of the Office of the Commissioner of Ethics going forward.
Do you understand the NDA requirements and how they could play a role in skewing the results of the McCarthy TETRO report?
Mr. Chair, McCarthy TETRO's report is a matter of public record, and they had complete access to all current and previous employees. Do you understand that an employee could not testify to their experience during the McCarthy TETRO report? Do you understand that? Mr. Chair, we are taking the McCarthy TETRO report very seriously. It was an independent report that was
But you're not taking it
before
seriously,
our
Ms.
time.
Morgan.
Very
I
much.
just asked you
Mr.
a very
Desjardins,
credible conflict.
Mr. Desjardins, that is the time
Thank
to
you
have
very much,
another
Mr. Chair.
opportunity. Beginning our second round, Mr. Cooper, you have the floor for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Ms. Morgan, this is a yes or no question. I take it from your testimony that with respect to the reassessment process that is underway with respect to each of the projects that had been approved by the previous corrupt board, the scope of the reassessments are to determine whether those projects satisfy the enhanced contribution agreement in order to be eligible for funding, but does not include reviewing conflicts of interest that may have resulted in those projects receiving funding by the previous corrupt board. Is that correct, yes or no?
Mr. Chair, we are reviewing the projects independently to assess their eligibility as recommended by the Auditor General.
No, I asked specifically with respect to conflicts of interest, wrongdoing, and so on, because the Auditor General found 186 conflicts, $330 million that went out the door involving conflicts, including $76 million tax dollars, in which board members actually deliberated and voted on approving funding that went into companies that they had interest in. Is that part of the reassessment process, yes or no?
Mr. Chair, if fraud or wrongdoing is found as part of our review of these projects, the board will take appropriate action.
Well, Ms. Morgan, how is it possible to identify fraud and wrongdoing if that's not part of the reassessment process?
Mr. Chair, there are strength and conflict of interest provisions that have been put in place, and no funding will be restarted without those conflict of interest issues also being taken into account. So we're looking at the eligibility reviews by independent assessors, and we're looking at all of the issues before we restart. And should we find any evidence of fraud or wrongdoing, of course the board will take appropriate action.
Why is that not part of the reassessment process?
Mr. Chair, the reassessment process that we're talking about vis-a-vis eligibility is what was recommended by the Auditor General, and we've put that in place with independent reviewers, 2 independent reviewers per project, to assess eligibility.
Okay,
that was the recommendation that the Auditor General made.
It's very clear, or it seems to be clear, that a priority is to get funding out the door, but much less of a priority is rooting out the corruption and conflicts involving hundreds of millions of taxpayer dollars. Now, Ms. Doyle stated, if we find any evidence of wrongdoing on the part of a recipient, the board will take action on recovery. What action has been taken to date to recover monies that improperly went out the door where there was wrongdoing? Because we already know of instances where that has been clearly established. What steps have been taken?
Mr. Chair, the process of reviewing the projects for eligibility is really at the beginning stage, and we've started to review those projects. We are looking at a process to restart funding that will address issues of eligibility and conflict of interest for previously approved projects. And we will only restart funding, Mr. Chair, in cases where these projects have been approved for eligibility independently, and the board has had a very close look at them, as the Auditor General has recommended.
Well, I asked Ms. Doyle, and I didn't receive a satisfactory answer, that in the case of Annette Verscheren, the former chair of the board, $220,000 went improperly out the door, funneled into her own company. This was identified in the Auditor General's report, and Ms. Verscheren has been found guilty by the Ethics Commissioner of violating the Conflict of Interest Act in respect of those payments. It's been months since Ms. Verscheren has been found guilty. What is the interim board doing to recover those funds? What is the interim board waiting for in that clear black and white case of corruption and conflict?
Mr. Chair, it's very important that we follow a clear and transparent process, and that is what the board has put in place. We will have independent reviews, 2 independent reviews per project. We'll assess each project for eligibility.
For eligibility, but not conflicts and corruption.
We're conducting these reviews as per the Auditor General's report.
Thank you. That is your time. Sorry, Ms. Morgan, were you still speaking? Okay,
That's good,
thank you. I
thanks.
just want to make sure. Up next, Mr. Erskine Smith. You have the floor for 5 minutes, please.
Thanks, Chair. I guess I want to start because if one were listening to this meeting, one might be confused. And so I just want to make sure that I've got some things clear in my mind. When McCarthy did its review of the workplace, there's been some suggestion that employees could not be forthcoming because they were unable to speak to the issue due to NDAs. My understanding, though, based on the evidence we've received, is that NDAs were not a barrier to employees being full and forthcoming with that review. Can you just clarify once and for all for us?
Partly Tetro, when it did its independent report, had complete access to all current and former employees, and all confidentiality provisions were waived.
Right.
So
Okay. So that seems fair enough. No, I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Yeah, that should be clear for everyone at this committee, I think. And again, sorry for the confusion, but there were some questions about why you're undertaking this reassessment, and my understanding had been that the Auditor General had specifically recommended that there be a reassessment of every single project. That's just so again, clarity that is the recommendation, and that is why you're undertaking the review, right?
The Auditor General did, in fact, request that every project be reassessed. I think it was recognized in the Auditor General report that there could be more information that hadn't been available at the time of approval, that there wasn't, in some cases, proper documentation. I can't really speak to the Auditor General's rationale, but that was a clear recommendation of the Auditor General, was to review every project during the period of the review.
Appreciate it. And just so I'm clear, you were not involved, you individually, you're on the board now. Were you involved in any of the previous approval decisions?
I was not.
The auditor, okay, thank you. And do you have, in the course of the conflict of interest challenges and in the course of the approval decisions that have been made, do you have a personal stake in any company that is subject to approval?
I do not.
Clear enough. And it feels like we're beating a dead horse here, but just so I'm absolutely clear on this, your job is to transition this organization into the NRC. Is that right?
That is correct.
Great. And I guess my last question in relation to the line of questioning that Mr. Cooper was going down. The Ethics Commissioner found two violations. One was in relation to this bundled decision of COVID payments. And obviously, it's a good thing that you and your colleagues are undertaking a project by project review to get to the bottom of things and make sure that all projects are eligible and there's no one is benefiting from funding simply because they have a stake in it, but it's based on proper eligibility and rigorous eligibility criteria, and you've already made clear it's independent reviews and everything else. There is that one company, though, that the former chair did have, not a sole owner in, but did have a stake in. It would be helpful, I think, for this committee, and you have articulated clear process, you've got clear processes that you're following, and I appreciate all that. It would be helpful if you could submit in writing, if the board can submit in writing at some point, information, process, and ultimately the decision in relation to that project in particular, because that is, as far as the public is concerned, that's the funding decision that has generated a lot of attention. It's the funding decision that was central to the Ethics Commissioner's decision. And obviously that Ethics Commissioner's report found it was the difference between an abstention and a recusal. And the Conservatives can cast this as, well, they have tried to cast it as a criminal matter in the most absurd terms. But this is the difference between an abstention and a recusal, and it was wrong. It was wrong to not fully recuse oneself and to only abstain. But that is the issue that has garnered the most attention. And so some clarity on process going forward and providing updates to this committee on that particular issue so we don't just have to beat the dead horse over and over and over again. And Chair, my last comment is simply when we have board members come to this committee, and we're going to ask very similar questions because their objectives are the same, it would be helpful to not spend 2 hours individually with separate board members. It would be helpful to group witnesses together where it is reasonably possible. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much. Suivant, c'est Madame Sinclair Desgagnés encore pour...
And now we shall hear from Ms. Sinclair Desgagnés, 2 minutes and 30 seconds. Ms. Morgan, you have mentioned that only projects that were found to be eligible by consultants will receive funding again. That's what you've just mentioned, correct?
Mr. Chair, the board has put in place a process which
Arrêtez de répéter la même phrase. C'est une question par oui ou par non. De confirmer.
So I'm asking you to confirm what you've just said because you just gave that answer. Only projects found to be eligible after they are reviewed will continue to be funded, correct?
Mr. Chair, as part of the review of eligibility, there will be an independent review, and the board will consider the results of that independent review in making a decision about project restart.
OK.
Okay, so you've just paraphrased and you've just lost a minute of my time. Thanks so much. Now, if a project is found ineligible, you will stop funding it?
If a project is found ineligible, we will take the appropriate action required under
Ça
the
veut dire quoi
circumstances.
précisément?
We are looking
What does that
at
mean?
individual projects, and we will need to assess in the case of individual projects what the appropriate action is. If there's
C'est-à-dire?
evidence for
Meaning?
fraud or wrongdoing on the part of the recipient, then the board will take action to recover funds.
Donc, encore
Okay, so once again, given that people will no longer be in a conflict of interest, if their projects are found eligible, they'll get funding again. Okay, thanks. That's fine. Now, next. Will you continue to be advised by Osler Law Firm?
Mr. Chair, we have retained an independent law firm to provide conflict of interest and ethics advice to
ma question
the,
était spécifiquement sur...
Look, my question is about Osler Firm. Are you dealing with them?
SDTC receives advice from a number of law firms depending on the issue at hand. We do continue to receive advice from Osler on certain...
Okay, fine. So, the firm at issue, the associate who was accused by Ms. Versoyun of having provided ill counsel, specifically on the bundle decisions and projects during the pandemic and also on contracts awarded, was an associate of Osler. And you're continuing to work with Osler. That's great to hear. Next, this same person advised the fund, Active Impact Fund, that also funds projects funded by SDTC. So Mr. Vandenberg, associate of Osler, was advising SDTC about what to fund and was also involved with the Active Impact Fund of Osler's, which funds the same projects as SDTC does. Question, please. Were you aware of this?
The individual in question does not provide legal advice to the board of SDTC.
Mais le cabinet, oui.
But the firm does.
On va retourner à vos questions, Madame Secrétaire.
Thank you.
Desjardins, you have the floor for 2.5 minutes, please.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I do want to return now to the issues present to us relative to a whistleblower, Witness One's report to this committee for the purpose of our study. In that testimony that not all members of this committee were subject to, they made very serious and damning concerns worth this committee's investigation. Part of those concerns were serious issues related to racism, sexism, homophobia, and real issues of systemic violence within STDC. These are serious, and they require serious investigation. And I think we need to talk about this, how we speak about whistleblowers, how we work with whistleblowers. Just this morning, for example, we have the Public Sector Integrity Commissioner asking for more money because of just the sheer volume of concerns related to the Liberal government and their serious issues within the public service. And so we do need to take more credible the real concerns of those who work in the public service when they come forward with concerns. It's a very legitimate and regular part of being a government. You should be able to investigate these with more serious concern. The McCarthy-Tetro report was rejected by the whistleblower, by the Witness One, as you might know. And they were rejected because of the specific issue of NDAs. You mentioned that all confidentiality was waived. Did that include non-disclosure agreements by the public or by the SDTC employees? Yes or no?
Mr. Chair, our focus
Ms. Morgan, please. I've asked you several times.
Is
it do you know that these NDAs are the question I'm asking about? You just said, in response to one of my colleagues, that all confidentiality was waived. The purpose of that statement is to try to confiscate what I'm trying to ask you, which is a very specific question. And Mr. Chair, I'll look to your support on this because it's now several times I've asked this question. Has the NDAs been waived for the purpose of the McCarthy-Tetro report? Yes or no?
Mr. Chair, these allegations were comprehensively reviewed. McCarthy to Tetro had complete access to all current and former employees.
Mr. Chair, can you please, I've asked it very clearly.
So Ms. Morgan, you are entitled, and it's perfectly acceptable to say if you don't know, you don't know, and you can get back to us. But that's a fine answer, and we'll certainly accept it. But as you can see, several witnesses are becoming a little are concerned their answers, their questions aren't being answered. And as I said, you're welcome to say you can look into it. You'll respond to us later. It is a pretty clear question, and I would ask you to try again, please.
Be happy to get back to the committee with more information on
So
that.
just to
Specific-
clarify,
in
you're not
specific
sure.
detail.
Mr. Desjardins?
Not sure.
Yeah,
Mr.
Hold on, Mr. Desjardins. I will let you ask what you would like. Ms. Morgan is going to get back to us, which I think is a suitable answer. She doesn't need to say any more than that. She's going to get back to us
Sure.
on that. So could you be clear what question you would like Ms. Morgan and her team to respond to?
Ms. Morgan, you asked, you responded to a question. You said in that response that all confidentiality was waived. I want support for that claim that you've made to this committee by way of a very direct answer to my very direct question. Were the NDAs that were signed by SDTC employees waived for the purpose of the McCarthy-Tetro report?
Thank you.
Can you please respond?
Thank you very much. Up next is Mr. Brock for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair, and welcome, Ms. Morgan, to committee. I'm going to start by following up on some loose ends based on other members' questions to you. Now, I was rather shocked in your response to one of the questions about the law firms that SDTC and the board are retaining. You said a number of law firms, and you also included Osler's in that mix. Now, Edward Vandenberg, I don't know if he is a partner of Osler's or an associate of Osler's, has acquired a notorious reputation for giving completely improper governance legal advice to the former chair of the SDTC board, Ms. Verschieren. She relied upon that advice, as did other board members, to enrich herself and other companies that she was associated with and other board members. Why on earth would SDTC and its current board, stating the obvious that you're here to restore trust within the system, that you are the overseer and you're going to ensure the prudent use of taxpayer money, why on earth would you associate yourself with that law firm when we have dozens of other leading national firms across this country? Why would you associate yourself with that? And you said quite assuredly that he is not part of giving us any legal advice. Well, how do you know that? Clearly, Mr. Vandenberg is not part of your meetings, but how do you know he is not continuing to provide advice to other associates or other partners who in turn give you advice? An obvious answer to that would be to cease all operations with Osler's. So why aren't you doing that?
Mr. Chair, SDTC no longer has any relationship with the lawyer who provided that advice. And we have engaged an independent conflict of interest and ethics advisor for the board and for the organization from a different law firm.
Is Osler giving you legal advice, yes or no?
We engage a number of law firms.
Answer the question. Ms. Morgan,
us,
answer the question. Is Osler giving you legal advice, yes or no?
Mr. Chair, depending on the nature of the legal advice, SDTC engages a number of law firms, including Osler, on certain issues.
So Osler is giving you legal advice on certain issues. Now, you're not part of any of the operations at Osler, so you cannot say definitively that Mr. Vandenberg is not part of that process. I think out of abundance of caution, you should be ceasing operations with Osler's. But I'll leave it at that and I'll move on. You talked about taking appropriate action if you discover fraudulent or wrongdoing. We clearly have evidence of Ms. Verschieren enriching herself in decision-making that resulted in a finding of breaching the Conflict of Interest Act. I also heard you say that you will take steps to recover money. That decision by the Ethics Commissioner was made several months ago, You've been on the new board since June the 4th. Why haven't you taken any action?
Mr. Chair, in the past 4 months, the board has focused on taking...
Not my question, Ms. Morgan. Why have you not taken action on behalf of the Canadian taxpayer to recover the ill-gotten gains of Ms. Verschuren? Why have you not started that process? I don't care about your other priorities. I know that's understandable, okay? But you also have a mandate to recover funds. If that mandate didn't come from the minister himself, I'm listening to your responses. That mandate is part of the new governance system. Why have you not taken steps to recover money for the taxpayer?
Mr. Chair, it has taken a few months for the board to get up and running and start to put into place the processes to deliver on its mandate.
Are you getting legal advice, ma'am? Are you getting legal advice from a law firm as to how that process should take place to recover funds, yes or no?
We have established a clear process. We have engaged advice. We have engaged independent reviewers.
Instead of speaking in generalities, Ms. Morgan, Ms. Morgan, it's my time. Instead of speaking in generalities, please let's start a refreshing approach and answer a direct question. Direct question is this: are you getting legal advice as to what process should be followed to recover money? Yes or no? And if you say yes, which law firm is giving you that advice?
Mr. Chair, we have indicated to the committee that if we find evidence of fraud or wrongdoing, the board will take action.
Again, Chair, she refuses to answer the
Mr.
question.
Chair.
Okay, one second. Yes, Monsieur, point of order.
I would appreciate if time could be given to Ms. Morgan to complete her answer.
Happy to if she actually answered the question.
Sur cet appel au règlement.
Mr. Brock, just 1 second. Oui, madame.
Yes.
Sur cet appel au règlement, je trouve vraiment décevant que le...
I think it's very disturbing to see that this witness is not answering any questions that require a yes or a no and is just playing a tape that I'm sure government officials have given her to play. It's important. We have questions. She should answer them as specifically as possible, respecting the time as well as the work that we're carrying out here. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Oui, monsieur Drouin. Appel au règlement encore?
Another point of order. Look, I would just like to ensure that we respect our witnesses. If we don't hear the answers, it can be a little frustrating, but, we do have to hold back as parliamentarians. We need to respect the witnesses, and with due respect for my colleagues as well. I do understand the frustration and feel it, but, he's asking a question, then he would like an answer, even, we don't get the answer. That's not my fault.
Oh, no, all right. So I think so you can... Ms. Morgan, you can see the position I'm in. There is some frustration where there are specific questions, but the responses are general in nature. Is this something you'd like to answer or come back to us on with a specific question to Mr. Brock about? Is there, Mr. Brock? Do you want to very specific, short? I don't want any preamble.
Yes, there's no preamble. Yes. Are you receiving legal advice about the process regarding recovery? If the answer is yes, which firm is giving you advice?
Thank you.
Very
is this something you could either answer or come back to us with an answer on,
yes, Mr. Chair, I'd be pleased to answer. Of course, we are receiving legal advice with respect to all of our next steps, including recoveries, and I would be pleased to get back to you with the name of the law firm. I just can't recall at the moment.
Thank you. We appreciate that, and we look for that answer. Thank you. Up next is Ms. Bradford. You have the floor for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Ms. Morgan, for being with us today. So in the interest of clearing up some obvious confusion here for anyone watching at home, I would just like to read into the record. McCarthy wrote on its website on December 1st, 2023, when it launched its review. SDTC has agreed that to facilitate the review, any employee or former employee can speak freely to McCarthy Tetra without fear of reprisal and without being considered as violating any applicable settlement agreements or non-disclosure agreements. So now, in the public record on the ISED website, Anyone can go on and see McCarthy's fact-finding review. It states, McCarthy prepared a consent form for current and former employees, which permitted the disclosure, use of information, of personal information in a manner consistent with the review and law. The consent form was not mandatory for participation. McCarthy also prepared a waiver form to encourage participation by releasing participants from any specific confidential information owed to SDTC. This waiver form was not mandatory for participation. So I just want to get that on the record because there's been a lot of back and forth and confusion with this. Now, returning to your opening statement, you did refer that the third-party reviews that are currently in place for the last requirement, that they're overseen by the board. What does your oversight as a board entail with these organizations that are conducting the reviews?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. That will entail looking at each of the projects and looking at the results of the independent reviews, the 2 independent reviews for each project, and taking into account any additional information provided by SDT staff that is based on or comes out of those reviews, and then the board assessing based on all of that information the issues around eligibility.
Okay, now I was also wondering, what are you in charge of as a board member? Alongside Ms. Doyle and Mr. Booth, are you all focused on leading different elements of the transitioner mandate?
Mr. Chair, we're all, as a board, accountable for the mandate that the Minister of ISED has given us. As Ms. Doyle noted during her testimony, she has been focused a bit more on the project restart, and I'm focused more on the transition of programming and people to the NRC.
Okay. Also, in your opening statement, you did state that funds should be dispersed shortly. Can you define shortly for us, please?
We're hoping within a number of weeks to be able to have, maybe by the end of the month, to have funds restarted for those projects. We're starting, our first priority is projects where the Auditor General did not find any concerns about eligibility. And then following that, projects where project milestones have been completed by the recipient, but funding has been paused.
Okay, so now last week we asked Ms. Doyle to comment on the legal risks associated with recouping funds from companies where there may not have been any wrongdoing, or there may have, the legal risk that this could place SDTC in the government if we were to do this haphazardly, as the Conservatives have suggested. I'm wondering if you could speak to the legal advice received on the question of recovery.
On the question of recoveries, you know, the main consideration from our perspective as a board is that we pursue these issues really on a fair and transparent way, based on a fair and transparent process, and that's why we've gone to external reviewers, and we're ensuring that the board reviews every project before we consider, you know, and then if we determine fraud and wrongdoing, then we'll consider the appropriate action. And of course, legal advice will need to be taken into account in those situations based on the contribution agreement, the agreements that were signed between the board, or between SDTC and the recipients, et cetera. So that is an important element, I think, as we move forward, is ensuring that that process is fair and transparent.
Ms. Doyle further explained that project agreements that you enter into with the recipient companies are legally binding documents, and there needs to be a violation of that document for there to be a justification for recouping funds. Have you received any written advice? And if so, would you be able to submit that to this committee?
Mr. Chair, I will have to take that under consideration vis-a-vis legal advice. But let me assure the committee that we are moving forward with this in the most fair and transparent way possible, taking into account the legal parameters, taking into account the contribution agreement, the agreements that have been signed, Should there be evidence of fraud or wrongdoing on the part of recipients, then of course the board will take appropriate action. But these things really do need to be assessed on a case-by-case basis, as the Auditor General has recommended.
Thank you, and I appreciate that response to Ms. Bradford's question about getting back to us. Of course, we hope witnesses will be as forthcoming as possible. I recognize there might be some limitations. If that is the case, you could spell that out in your response, and the committee will take it up at that point. But thank you very much for that offer. Beginning now our third round. Again, Mr. Perkins, you have the floor for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I know MP Erskine Smith is new to this file. He's had a whole 3 meetings on it, where most of us have been working on it for a year. So I'll just bring a little up to speed on this. First of all, the Ethics Commissioner report comes from a letter a year ago from Conservatives asking to look into one person of the 9 that the Auditor General in the spring found out had conflicts of interest. The Ethics Commissioner reported that 2 is actually 24 conflicts of interest by that single individual. And there are 186 conflicts of interest, or 82% of the transactions, MP Erskine Smith, representing almost $400 million. Apparently that's something you're dismissing, but it's a clear issue, to the point that the RCMP announced last week they're doing a criminal investigation, just for the record. I'd like to go back to the issue, if I could, Ms. Morgan. You've said if the companies have been found to do something criminal, I suspect you're not going to find the companies did anything criminal. The issue is the directors. Are you, and is the acting board, doing an investigation into the culture of conflict of interest that created 82% of the transactions being conflicted? Because that's the issue. The issue isn't that some of these companies may have been a reasonable company. It's just that they got preferred access to the funding because of that. And I'll share with you an example. The Vasharen Center, the chair sought $6.8 million for her own Vasharen Center at Cape Breton University. It did get it rejected eventually after being fast-tracked by the VP of Investments at SDTC, fast-tracked that application. That person is now the acting president, by the way, of SDTC. He fast-tracked it. But when it got rejected in the investment committee for conflict of interest, that same person wrote to staff and said, we will help find funding for the Vasharen Center for other parts of government. And then the Vasharen Center then went on obviously the employees' work, to get $10 million from ISED and ACOA to help the Vasharen Center. So the issue is how board members approved in their little cabal each other's projects, as they declared at the beginning of each board meeting, you know, Larry's got a conflict of this, Rick's got a conflict of that, and these are all the conflict. Now, Larry will leave when his one conflict happens, but we'll then approve it, and then I'll leave when my conflict is up. That's how it works when 82% of the transactions are conflicted. They must have had trouble getting quorum because they were so conflicted. So my question is, are you, as an acting board member, brought in by this minister, Minister Champagne, who said he was going to clean the place up, not engaging anyone to examine, since you've already said the Auditor General's not in again, to examine that culture of conflict of interest in the board that led to these $330 million being given to companies these people had an interest in?
Mr. Chair, the current board does not have any conflicts of interest with sustainability.
I didn't. Sorry, this is the problem why we're having these issues with your answers. I didn't ask about the current board. I asked about the past board. How can you do an analysis of whether or not a company is eligible in the restart of this if you haven't done an investigation into the governance conflicts of interest in this organization?
Mr. Chair, in terms of the organization, the Auditor General made a number of recommendations about exactly the issue that the member is referring to, which is the culture and the processes around conflict of interest. And those elements of the Auditor General's report which were aimed at strengthening reporting and strengthening disclosure. Those elements of the Auditor General's report have been implemented.
I'm not talking, I'm sorry, you're not listening to my question. My question is about the restart of funding to these organizations, many of whom, 82%, got preferential treatment. How can you do a legitimate analysis of whether or not their funding should be restarted if the new board is not examining the fact that they got sped up in the line and fast-tracked for funding? It's in emails. They got fast-tracked for funding over other companies. How can you restart that? That's the essence of the problem here. And the new board isn't doing any investigation into that?
Mr. Chair, as we consider our process to restart funding, we will address issues of both eligibility and conflict of interest for previously approved projects.
Thank you very much. Puis encore, Mr. Drouin, s'il vous plaît. Vous avez 5 minutes.
Mr. Drouin, you have 5 minutes. Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. All right. So, somewhat in the same line of questioning as that of my colleague, Mr. Erskine-Smith, I certainly agree that we need to look into these issues. However, if we're simply going over and over the same things, you know, we have my kind colleagues on the other side asking questions about who has been advising you on the legal side. We know it has been established, thanks to our colleague here, Ms. Bradford, that McCarthy-Tétrault had, of course, brought up all these issues about privacy and disclosure among those who work for SDTC.
Recuperating funds, and I want to make sure that we understand what's at stake here. So the last board member who appeared before us, I asked her the questions of legal analysis, and which is one risk. The eligibility criteria is one risk, but I'm assuming that the board will, you know, if you're trying to recoup $15,000 and it's going to cost you $50,000 of legal fees, I'm assuming the board will have to take that into account at some point. So the criteria, while the Auditor General has recommended that SDTC does a full-blown review of all existing contribution agreements with the current businesses, but the board will have to make a decision as to whether or not the amount is worth going after, because it may cost you more in legal fees, I'm assuming.
Yes, Mr. Chair, all of those issues would need to be taken into account.
Okay. And I'm assuming that when we talk about conflict of interests, there's various conflict of interests where board members were recusing themselves. There was a real conflict of interest, so direct interest within a particular business, but there are also others that were perceived and potential. I'm assuming that the board will look at those three criteria to ensure a potential conflict of interest. Well, it's, you know, I may or may not work at this company in the future. I may have a potential conflict of interest in the future. Therefore, I will recuse myself out of precaution. That obviously, in today's conversation, causes more seriousness to the concern that we're trying to address. But I'm assuming the board will have to assess those three different categories of conflict of interests.
Yes, Mr. Chair, and as the Auditor General's, findings of the Auditor General also, you know, really focused around process around conflict of interest, reporting. So there were a whole range of issues that were identified in that report, and that's really what's guiding us as we move forward.
Obviously, I have an issue with a real conflict of interest, even a perceived one. You're walking on the gray line, but a potential one is very it's out there. My other question is we're trying to predetermine what may or may not show up in that review, but knowing that the Auditor General has looked at four, she said 4 out of 42 contribution agreements were revised. 4 of them were deemed by us ineligible. I'm assuming that those 4 companies are currently being reviewed by the third party.
Mr. Chair, one category of projects that was deemed ineligible was the ecosystem project, and the board immediately ceased funding for ecosystem projects and will not take any further applications for those. There were also issues vis-a-vis the governance of decision-making around seed projects, and so the board decided early in our mandate that we won't be taking any more applications for those as well. And as for the startup projects, each one of them will be reviewed. Our early priority is for companies who have met the requirements of their agreements with SDTC and where funding has been paused, but they have met the key milestones of the project.
So Seed Stream has been canceled. That represented 1.2 EcoStream, 5 million, and now we're talking about the startup stream, the scale-up stream. Obviously, the question of COVID-19 relief payments, well, that's over, but is that also being reviewed by the team, by the third party? Or?
Well, every individual project will be looked at on its own based on the independent eligibility review, and of course, as conflict of interest is considered, those issues will be considered as well.
Okay, and then, so we know there's 3 board members obviously serving there, managing the transition. I think the previous member may have been you who said we're developing an eligibility criteria to recoup dollars if we're able to. Is that being done as board, as not as an individual board member, but as a board? You guys are looking at this.
The board is assessing every individual project, and the board will take the appropriate action should we discover cases such as fraud or wrongdoing where recovery is appropriate.
Thank you very much. That is your time, Mr. Drouin. Suivant, c'est Madame Sinclair-Desgagnés encore pour 2 minutes.
Now, Ms. Sinclair-Desgagnés, 2 minutes and 30 seconds, Madam. So, picking up on my colleague's question about Osler, I would like to ask you a very specific question, and I'd like you to get back to us if you need to with an answer. In the answer that you will provide to us, I would like you to mention the type of legal advice that Osler is providing to SDTC. I would like a list of topics that Osler is advising you on. The reason is simple. Osler is very active in a fund, Active Impact, and Active Impact's portfolio includes quite a few companies that have been working with SDTC. So the firm providing you advice about which firms you should fund or not and whether you should invest in which funds. One of the businesses that was in SDTC's portfolio but now is no longer on the website, at least, Empowered, was found to be a company that was in conflict of interest. So this type of company is also the sort of company that's receiving funds from Active Impact, which, as I say, has a close link to Osler Law Firm. Do you find this normal?
Mr. Chair, we'll obviously endeavor to provide the committee with the information that's been requested. In terms of funding decisions, we seek independent advice, and those independent advisors are required to follow the same conflict of interest provisions which have been strengthened based on the Auditor General's review and all of the processes put in place. So it's very important that the individual...
Thank you. I'm running out of time. Back to the companies that have been found to be ineligible. You have repeated several times that if there's fraud, wrongdoing, etc., you'll try to recoup the money. So for many of the companies, there wasn't specific fraud, of course. That's clear enough. On the other hand, if you go looking for funds or you simply stop funding companies that are found to be ineligible, you will be risking a lawsuit because the agreements can't be terminated. So what will you be actually doing with these companies? Very specific question here. Picking up on that put by my colleague, Mr. Drouin, what will you do with the ineligible companies where there hasn't been any fraud or wrongdoing?
Mr. Chair, we will need to look at each of these situations on a case-by-case basis to determine the best path forward.
Est-ce que vous pouvez nous fournir la réponse par écrit?
Could you give us a written answer, please?
Mr. Chair, we'll be providing quarterly updates to ISED as per the contribution agreement and the advice of the Auditor General. So this is an issue that we will be providing regular updates on.
Mais ce comité.
Yeah, but the committee.
Encore une fois.
Oui. C'est juste de demander.
Yeah, it's just to ask for a follow-up. Can Ms. Morgan please provide us with an answer as to what she'll do with these companies, that she could tell the committee? Would you like me to repeat the question, the subject? No? Or yes? Okay. What will you do with the projects found to be ineligible by your special consultants and weren't themselves responsible for this ineligibility? What will you do with their contribution agreements?
Provide to the community, because I think Madame Secretary is looking for the other side of the envelope, what is not being provided, whereas I think what your group is going to be providing is those that are receiving funds. Est-ce que j'ai bien compris?
We'll
Have I got that?
provide more information on this, Mr. Committee Chair, yes.
Thank you. And I will wrap this up at the end in terms of timelines and things like that, so I appreciate that, Ms. Morgan. Okay, suivant. Next up is Mr. Desjardins for 2.5 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I do now want to turn to the Auditor General's report, recommendations 6.26 and 6.29, specifically 6.29. Sustainable Development Technology Canada should reassess projects approved during the audit period to ensure that they meet the goal or met the goal and objectives of the Sustainable Development Technology Fund and all its eligibility criteria. This is a pretty serious bulk of your work, trying to ensure that there's a fair transition, not just for SDTC and taxpayers, but for the companies. And I understand that. But in the instance where there are ineligible projects like the ones noted by the Auditor General, in your reassessment of those projects, is there a potential outcome where the government or SDTC or NRC begin a process of recovery for those taxpayer dollars?
Mr. Chair, that is a possible outcome. We need to look at each one on a case-by-case basis. As we've noted, if we see evidence of fraud or wrongdoing on the part of recipients, we will undertake recovery and take appropriate action. And we will be looking at each case on a case-by-case basis in terms of what the appropriate action is as this process continues.
It seems important and part of your, I think, mandate as an ability to build public trust and to rebuild SDTC. It was mentioned by my Liberal colleagues that there may be an instance where the recovery amount is simply too small and it would cost too much for the government in the operation of trying to recover that fund. What is your perspective about that?
Mr. Chair, I think that all of those issues will need to be taken account, and that's why we've put in place a process to look at each project individually and to assess the circumstances of each project.
You know, I think
that, yeah.
When I think about this issue, about the issue of recovery, the importance of recovering funds that were inelibly given or granted to an organization or a company, those should be recovered. This is the same policy that the government has right now for COVID recipients. If you're an ineligible COVID recipient, they want to claw it back right now. And many of these people are just like $5, $10, maybe even $100 over the limit. They're barely ineligible, and they're very poor, they're working class people, and they're finding it very difficult to pay back this amount of money. Why is it that the companies, when I ask that question about how we treat individuals, how we treat people when they're just over the ineligibility line for COVID, the government said, we're going to recover all of it. But when it comes to these huge companies that are getting all this funding, it seems as though there isn't a clear answer or any kind of confidence that you're giving me or Canadians that any amount will be recovered for these ineligible projects.
Mr. Chair, it's important that we follow a clear and transparent process. In the case where there's evidence of fraud or wrongdoing, the board will take action. If there are funds, for example, that are ineligible costs or areas where funding exceeds STT's contribution agreements, we will, of course, pursue those. So we need to look at each project on an individual basis, and the board will take appropriate action.
Including recovery.
Thank you.
That could include recovery.
Thank you. You will have another opportunity, Mr. Desjardins. Turning now to Mr. Cooper, you have the floor for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. Morgan, you have repeatedly said that where there is evidence of fraud or wrongdoing on the part of recipients, that that will be considered for the purposes of eligibility. You emphasized time and again the word recipient. Are you considering conflicts of interest on the part of the former corrupt board members in assessing eligibility for projects? Yes or no?
Mr. Chair, the process that we've developed to look at projects in terms of funding restart, which is primarily what we're talking about, will
Ms.
address
Morgan,
both
my
issues
time is
of
limited, and I asked you a
eligibility
very
and
specific
conflict of
question
interest.
that you haven't answered, and it's an hour and a half into the hearing, and you've been asked this question or something in these terms, but you haven't actually given a direct answer.
Mr. Crew, just a reminder, while I appreciate Ms. Morgan is here to answer questions, Ms. Morgan, I will remind you that the time is the members, and I know there's always back and forth when they insist on ending your answer for whatever reason. If you could just yield to them, please. And I appreciate you've been doing that generally. Time is limited, and we are coming to the end. So, Mr. Cooper, you have 4 minutes. You can restate the question, but I think it was heard. Do you want to?
Well,
time is yours. 4 minutes.
Yes or no? Are conflicts of interest on the part of the former corrupt board being considered, being assessed for the purpose of eligibility of those very projects that were approved and went out the door involving conflicts of interest of those board members? Yes or no?
As we look at the process to restart funding, we will address issues of eligibility and conflict of interest for previously approved projects.
So the answer to that is yes or no?
We will look at both eligibility and conflict of interest for previously approved process as we look at
You were very
restart of
specific in
program
using
funding.
the word recipient before. Now I'm asking you whether you are also considering conflicts involving board members. You have refused to answer yes or no on that very specific question. So I'll put it to you again, yes or no.
Mr. Chair, as we look at different issues, different considerations come into play, and vis-a-vis
Yes
recoveries.
or no?
Point of order,
of order,
please.
Chair.
Point of order.
Yes, Ms. Yep.
Should let the witness answer and not badger her. Give her the time to, be able to answer in fullness, please.
Thank you, Ms. Yep. Well, I have another point of order, Ms. Khalid, or Ms. Yep. Yes, all right. So, Mr. Cooper, you have the floor for 3 minutes. Look, I'll just say this to all members on both sides. I appreciate that direct answers are expected. Mr. Cooper is trying to narrow their response. He's entitled to do that. And Mr. Cooper, I turn the floor back to you, please, for 3 minutes.
I'm awaiting an answer to a yes or no question. She's wasting my time. Yes or no?
Mr. Chair, these are complex and nuanced issues, and they need to be looked at on a case-by-case basis under the process that we've established.
So you can't give a yes or no answer as to whether that is specifically being considered. So I'll take it as a no. So which is astounding. And so what it means is that projects that got ahead of the queue because of corrupt board members will continue to reap the benefits of the corruption at
Point of order,
SDTC
Mr. Chair.
that led to the
Point of
freezing
order,
of funds
yes.
and a damning Auditor General's
Yes,
report.
Mr. Durian.
I recognize that it's the honourable member's time, but he's putting words into the witness's mouth that has not been said publicly.
Well, that is what I take from her testimony.
So I didn't catch the putting words. I think Mr. Cooper is summarizing how he sees it. Mr. Cooper, you have the floor for 2:20.
So in essence, it's not a priority to clean up corruption. It's not a priority to clean up the conflicts. It's in fact, what is a priority is the status quo, to get money out the door as quickly as possible. It's really, really outrageous. Now, you said that you are in charge of, or part of your responsibility on the interim board is to oversee transparency with respect to transfer to the NRC. the SDTC every quarter published all funding decisions, project by project. Will that transparency continue when SDTC projects are transferred to the NRC? Yes or no?
Mr. Chair, I can't speak to that issue. We're in the process of discussion with the NRC.
Ms. Morgan, you said that your role is to oversee the transfer to the NRC. That is your primary focus as a board member, one of the 3 board members. You said transparency is a priority. I cited an example where there actually was a level of transparency at SDTC, and I'm asking you, will that continue? And if you can't answer that, are you at least taking steps to see that it will continue?
Mr. Chair, we've got a process in place where we're working through all of these issues with the NRC.
I asked you a simple question, and you dodge, once again, talking in generalities about process. Answer the question. I asked you very specifically about quarterly reports from SDTC.
Point of order, Mr. Chair.
Yes, Ms. Khalid.
I don't think we're in the business of embarrassing or harassing witnesses that come before this committee.
Look, Ms. Khalid, I appreciate this is frustrating, and these are good questions. And we're a parliamentary committee where which the witness can refute. Mr. Cooper's being very specific with respect to his questions, and he is entitled to pose them. I would hope we would get an answer. But when he doesn't get an answer, he is entitled to drill down further. Mr. Cooper, you have the floor.
Point of order, actually.
Yes, Mr.
When you say answer the question, you're not addressing that through the chair. I think that's what my colleague, Ms. Khalid,
all right,
is trying
Mr.
to
Cooper,
say.
then if you could send your questions through the appreciate it.
Mr. Chair, can the witness answer the question?
Chair, the NRC is an independent organization, and I am sure that they will be very transparent. But I can't answer the specific question about whether they will follow exactly the same transparency procedures as SDTC.
Again, it's astounding that you can't assure that there would be at least an equivalent level of transparency, but there in fact might be less transparency, which would completely undermine one of the purported objectives of moving SDTC over to the NRC, that there would be less transparency, not more transparency. I think that what is going on, Mr. Chair, is that the minister is working to ensure that there will not be public scrutiny, that there won't be parliamentary scrutiny in the future of the kind of corruption that has been identified in SDTC. It's about burying the corruption going forward.
Thank you, Mr. Cooper. Ms. Khalid, the floor is yours for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you to Ms. Morgan for being here today. Really appreciate your testimony. I know there are a couple of questions have been asked about from you about what has been the prior case to what is the current case and what is going to be the future. So can you please help us walk through the entirety of your involvement with what has happened prior to what is currently ongoing with you and what the future holds with respect to this issue?
Mr. Chair, the board of the SDTC is really focused on moving forward on the mandate that Minister Champagne has provided us. So looking at the 3 elements of that mandate, the first one being implementing the Auditor General's report. We have implemented 10 of the 11 recommendations of the Auditor General. As outlined, and there's one more underway, which has we've been discussing today, which is the individual review of each project for eligibility. The second element that the board has been working on is restarting funding for clean tech companies. We've engaged in a third-party review, and once these reviews have been completed, we are hoping to be able to restart funding, particularly for those companies where they've met their project milestones and they've been waiting for funding because funding has been paused, as well as for those projects where there were no eligibility issues identified. And then the third piece, Mr. Chair, is transitioning programming and staff to the NRC. You know, this is really about people. There's so much talent at SDTC and people who are so committed to the future of the sustainable development technology sector in Canada, and working with SDTC to ensure a smooth transition of people and programs to the NRC. So that will be our focus going forward, and thus far we've established solid working relationships and good working groups between the two organizations to organize that.
Thank you very much for that. Now, I know that it sometimes feels like a kangaroo court in here where a lot of companies get put through the ringer. And this whole matter, and as disappointed as I am in how this corruption has really implicated and impacted a lot of our green tech, our clean tech sector, can you please help us understand kind of what that transition has looked like, especially with the freezing of funds of companies? How has that impacted the industry in your current role? What do you see?
Well, there's no question we have heard that companies, you know, some companies are having difficulty because funding for their projects has been paused, and there's a lot of interest of companies to know when funding could be restarted, and you know, so to enable them to continue and remain financially viable during this this period. You know, the SDTC funds sustainable development projects in, you know, in agriculture and manufacturing, in energy and forestry. It's quite a broad scope of projects that are funded by SDTC, and a lot of very interesting companies that have a lot of potential. So, you know, we are looking forward to being able to move forward on that part of the mandate.
And when will funding resume for a lot of these companies? I know there was a freeze put on, rightly so, because we want to make sure that when funding resumes, it is transparent and that Canadians are able to understand how Canadian dollars are being spent. So how is that going to resume?
We have the processes in place now, a renewed contribution agreement with ISED, and the project review process restarted. So we're hopeful that soon we'll be able to provide funding to those projects where the Auditor General did not identify eligibility concerns, and then to projects where project milestones have been met, and the funding has been paused.
Perhaps talk a little bit about the renewed contribution agreement and how that is impacting the industries, and how that is going to be implemented, especially with respect to conflict of interest.
There are a number of recommendations of the Auditor General that are reflected in the renewed contribution agreement, and that required, in fact, changes to the contribution agreement. So that includes enhancing oversight, including conflict of interest reporting and disclosure, quarterly reporting that demonstrates compliance within the terms of conditions of the contribution agreement, clarity on the role of ISED vis-a-vis SDTC, enhanced oversight and auditing, and also clarification of eligibility requirements, because it was noted in the Auditor General's report that in some cases there was a lack of clarity around eligibility, including, for example, the technology readiness level. So all of those changes that came out of that report have been incorporated now and will be taken into account going forward.
Thank you. That is the time. Beginning our fourth round, Mr. Brock, you have the floor for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair. So I want to build again on some of the questions and your responses from previous members, and I think I want to focus in on the corruption associated with the Green Slush Fund, and surprisingly, and actually refreshing, I should use the appropriate phrase, it was refreshing to hear from my colleague, Liberal MP Iqra Khalid, my apologies, actually refer to this as corruption, because that's exactly what it is. And I'm sure, Ms. Morgan, given your level of experience with government, you're certainly familiar with the sponsorship scandal that brought down the Chrétien and Martin governments. You're familiar with that?
Yes, Mr. Chair.
Yes. And it's no small wonder, given the gravity of what we have with the Screen Slush Fund corruption scandal, that an associate deputy minister was heard on a secret tape referring to exactly this. This is a sponsorship-style level of corruption within the government, the likes that he has not seen since the sponsorship scandal. So, on the issue then of corruption, it's no small wonder that the opposition parties, collectively all the opposition parties, voted in favor of an order for more transparency. And what that entailed was essentially ordering documentation from the government, documentation from the Auditor General, documentation from the SDTC to shed more light. The Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, essentially said that sunlight was the best way to promote transparency and accountability. He ran on that in 2015. The order of the House was made June the 10th, 2024. On June the 11th, the Clerk of the Court sent letters to the Clerk of the Privy Council, the CEO of SDTC, and the Auditor General of Canada to inform them of the order. It was to be received, the documents to be received by July the 10th, 2024. And no small surprise, given the level of corruption and secrecy behind this, that a great number of government departments and subsidiaries essentially redacted pages, hundreds of pages of documents pursuant to the order, which is the opposite of transparency and accountability. And of note, I note the Canada Revenue Agency, heavily redacted, the Innovation, Science and Economic Development, heavily redacted, National Research Council, heavily redacted, Justice Canada, and the Privy Council Office. Now, I want to confirm from your perspective the documentation that SDTC provided pursuant to this order was completely unredacted. Is that accurate? Is that correct?
Mr. Chair, we have provided all of the documents requested by Parliament. A very small number were redacted based on solicitor-client privilege alone.
Redacted on the basis of identity and addresses and personal information, or some other reason that you can't get into?
Mr. Chair, the only documents that were redacted by SDTC were documents that included solicitor-client privilege, which is essentially legal advice. We provided 10,000 documents. I believe around 300 of them included some redaction for
300
legal
pages.
advice. Yeah,
Okay.
legal advice.
Okay.
Yeah.
And were you part of that process of gathering up the documents, reviewing it, consulting with lawyers on the basis of what redactions, if any, would be made? Was that a decision made by you and the board?
The board directed staff and council to fully comply with the order.
Okay. And did you or any other member of the board actually review the documents, the some 10,000 pages of documents, prior to its release to the government?
Mr. Chair, those documents were reviewed by staff and council.
Okay.
Under the direction of the board to fully comply with the order of Parliament.
Okay, and given your mandate, your new mandate in terms of rooting out fraudulent and wrongdoing and taking the appropriate action, my spidey sense on what's transparency right now, in the House we have a privilege motion that has been ongoing for a number of days and will continue for a number of days, because it was the government itself and every member of government in the backbench who refused to vote in favor of the disclosure requests and are now opposed to the release of these documents. They're claiming for charter-protected reasons, which is just completely nonsense.
Your question, Mr. Brock, we'll wrap it up.
Yes,
please.
the question is, do you think it's an appropriate use of our time to demand accountability? Do you think Canadians deserve accountability and full access to all the documents to assist you ultimately in the process of ensuring fraud and wrongdoing is rooted out and that appropriate recovery action takes place? Yes or no?
Mr. Chair, my role is as a member of the board of SDTC, and we have complied with the order of Parliament for the production of papers.
Thank you very much. Turn down to Ms. Yip. You have the floor for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you. Last week we heard that from Ms. Doyle that the transition into NRC is happening on an expedited timeline. And this is the final Auditor General's recommendation, a project review, which is currently underway and should be done in the next few weeks. I'm just wondering if you could provide this committee with a bit more details on the project review.
Mr. Chair, in the detailed report in the detailed response to the Auditor General's report that SDTC tabled with this committee, we indicated that we would plan to complete the independent reviews of project eligibility by the end of December of this year.
And can you give us a little more detail, like which project you're looking at?
Yes, we have brought in independent reviewers for each project, and so each project will be reviewed by 2 independent reviewers, and we are reviewing them on a priority basis. First of all, starting with projects that are active, where funding has been paused, and where the project milestones have been met, and so the companies in question have fulfilled their obligations under the contract, but you have not yet received their funding because of the funding pause. So we'll be proceeding sort of au fur et à mesure to review all of the projects, prioritizing those in the short term where they've been meeting their obligations, but SDTC has not been able to provide them with the funding under the agreements.
Ms. Doyle also explained that the project agreements you enter into with recipient companies are legally binding documents, and that there needs to be a violation of that document for there to be justification for recouping of funds. Have you received any written advice?
We have not. We are really at the front end right now of looking at these eligibility reviews. I expect to be able to report more on that at a later date, and we will be reporting quarterly to ISED, including on the eligibility reviews and what is being determined through those reviews. So I expect more information to be available on that in the coming months.
Okay. Could you provide an update to this committee?
We will be providing quarterly updates to ISED, and I will obviously look into what can be shared from the committee. But I think that is part of the Auditor General's report is really to ensure transparency in everything that we're doing.
How many law firms have you sought legal advice from?
Oh, I will have to return to the committee with information on that.
Okay. So extensive training has been implemented. Can you elaborate on that?
Yes, there has been training on the conflict of interest management, appropriate management and documentation of conflict of interest, and that training has been provided to all of our staff when we bring on independent advisors on projects. As noted, they also receive advice on conflict of interest reporting, and also as a board, we have been advised by both the Office of the Conflict of Interest and Ethics Commissioner and by our own independent advisor who advises us on a regular basis on anything related to conflict of interest.
Outside contractors are also held to a stricter conflict of interest expectation. Was this clarified and put in more detail in the renewed contribution agreement?
Yes, the contribution agreement updated the provisions around conflict of interest, as did all of our internal processes. And this started prior to the Auditor General's report, and then the Auditor General's report provided additional recommendations which allowed us to further strengthen those processes.
A brief question, Ms. Chair?
Okay, yes. What position is the industry in after a year of frozen funding at SDTC? What are you hearing from the industry?
Yes, I mean, we're hearing from the industry that they are very much looking forward to having funding restarted as per one of the pillars of our mandate that was given to us by the Minister of ISED. You know, there are companies who have proceeded with their projects, and they have met their project requirements, and they certainly are interested in receiving the funding that they are due for the work that they have done.
Thank you very much, et voilà, merci beaucoup. Suivant, c'est Madame Sinclair-Desgagnés pour...
Thank you. And now Ms. Sinclair-Desgagnés for 2 minutes and a half. I think that your request, you asked for a final time. Yes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. Morgan, you mentioned 2 independent reviews currently underway for each project on a case-by-case basis. Could you name the 2 auditors or consultants or the people who are carrying this out?
We've hired a number of firms, and I'm happy to provide those names to the committee.
S'il vous plaît, merci beaucoup.
Please do, thank you.
Le fait que beaucoup d'entreprises devaient recevoir.
When you mentioned that a number of companies should be receiving funds and that your mandate is now to ensure a transition to the NRC, it's really important to keep in mind that we have no guarantee whatsoever because the Privy Council Office cannot reassure us about this issue. No guarantee then that the companies, or rather that the funds that were earmarked for SDTC and now will be sent to NRC will actually be used to fund green technology. Can you guarantee that the funding that will come down the pipeline to future companies will indeed be used for green technology?
Mr. Chair, decisions around the funding are not the decision of the board of SDTC. Those questions would be better directed to the government departments involved.
Donc, vous n'avez aucune idée alors que vous faites la transition.
So you've no idea. You're in charge of this transition, but you don't know what future funding disbursements will be for?
We expect that NRC will receive funding that will enable them to take over the programs of the NRC, but the nature of those decisions and the timing of those decisions are not the responsibility of the board of SDTC.
Bon, c'est quand même inconclusive.
Okay, that's disturbing given that you've been on the board for 4 months, and it's really important when you undertake a transition to know what the funds that were being managed by SDTC will continue to be used for such excellent aims, the green technology, small and medium-sized businesses that need this funding to carry out this transition. It's really important that the funding that was dispersed to SDTC be used for the same purposes it originally was intended for, and you can't guarantee that?
Mr. Chair, we expect that funding will be available to the NRC, and obviously that's an important part of the transition, as the member has noted, but that would be more the subject of government departments to confirm.
Thank you. Another brief question. In this entire situation with the report and taking down SDTC, will you finally say how sorry you are to the non-disclosure, the whistleblowers who have done so much to ensure that this goes forward?
Mr. Chair, our focus as a board is on the people at SDTC and ensuring a fair process of transition for them to the NRC.
Thank you very much.
So the answer is no. No apologies. All right. Thank you, Ms. Desgagnés. Mr. Desjardins for 2 minutes and 30 seconds.
Chair, I do want to touch on the subject by my previous colleague in relation to what you say. I'm going to quote you from earlier in this meeting. It's about people. It's about a smooth transition to the NRC in regards to the SDTC working group folks who are responsible for much of the innovation and support at SDTC. These are folks that were needed across the country. The competitive landscape for these kinds of professionals is extreme. We've learned this throughout issues of ArriveCan, for example, when the government doesn't actually have people of expertise in the technology development sector. It ends up going to private companies. Those private companies then get involved in what is a myriad of procurement issues that we discovered through ArriveCan. In order to prevent such a thing, I'm really happy to know that this is being transitioned to the NRC, as a matter of fact, because many of the employees at NRC are unionized. They're Public Service Alliance employees, and I'm really looking forward to ensuring that those employees are well protected, because I'm not confident, of course, by the lines of my questioning, that that has taken place thus far. So when will the employees of SDTC know if they've been offered a position at the National Resource Council?
We expect that information will be able to be provided to employees within the coming months. We don't have an exact date at this point, but we're working with the NRC to do that as quickly as possible, exactly to retain the talent and to give the employees assurance as well and some confidence in the future.
Yeah, I'd say months is probably too long for that. A lot of people have to pay rent. A lot of people got to actually live in this economy. And waiting and waiting and waiting isn't good enough for those employees. Will they receive equal or higher salary?
Those details are being worked out right now through working groups that have been set up by SDTC and NRC to work together on those issues.
The Treasury Board has issued a requirement for employees to return to work. Will the prior contracts between employees and SDTC in relation to remote contracts be honored?
I would expect that SDTC employees would become members of the union, so that their positions would be associated with at NRC and would be subject to the employment conditions of the NRC when they're transferred.
So they won't?
I would expect that they would be subject to the conditions of the NRC. However, all of those details are under discussion right now between the NRC and SDTC.
Would you support in the transition a recommendation by your board to suggest that those contracts between SDTC and those employees that receive remote contracts, like Indigenous employees in northern communities or rural or remote workers, can ensure they continue to work for the public service? Would you recommend that?
We're focused on ensuring fairness for employees, on encouraging employees to move from SDTC to NRC, to keeping that talent.
The best encouragement is honoring the word of SDTC. Will you honor the contracts between their employees of SDTC if they transition to the NRC to honor their workplace contracts?
All of these issues need to be worked out with the NRC as the SDTC.
Ms. Morgan, that's probably my time. Moral courage is required to protect these workers and our economy.
I'm afraid that is your time, Mr. Desjardins. Up next, we have Mr. Perkins for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think I'll start off this round by tabling a motion and then speaking to it, if I could, Mr. Chair. And I think the clerk has the motion on.
Are you moving it or are you tabling it?
Moving it.
Moving it. Okay,
moving
thank
it.
you very much.
And if the clerk could circulate it to members.
We'll wait until you've read it out first
Okay.
to make sure it aligns with
Like
anything the clerk may have
I'm
received.
moving this motion that in relation to the committee's ongoing study of Sustainable Development Technology Canada, SDTC, and given that one, former SDTC board member Andre Lise-Matot received SDTC funding for Cycle Capital Investments while she was on the board of SDTC, despite her being both the founder and beneficial owner of the venture capital firm, and given two, Minister Stephen Guilbeault previously served as strategic advisor for Cycle Capital for a decade prior to running for office, and was awarded shares as part of his compensation at Cycle Capital that he continues to hold. That the committee therefore invite Minister Guilbeault to appear to speak to his past affiliation with the venture capital firm and whether he's been involved in any discussions related to SDTC since joining Cabinet. Now, for those of you who are new to this issue that are on the committee.
Just 1 second, Mr. Perkins. So I'm going to, the clerk's going to distribute it. I'm going to allow Mr. Perkins to speak for a few minutes, then I'm just going to suspend for a couple minutes after that. Ms. Morgan, in the meantime, if you just want to hold fast, but if you're welcome, if you want to stretch your legs, freshen up, anything like that, just don't go too far. Sometimes these things resolve themselves quickly, and there is one round, there's, I suppose, 10 minutes left. Sometimes they don't, in which case I might very well excuse you. But for now, please feel free to get up, stretch your legs. Just don't go more than 5-10 minutes away. Thank you. Mr. Perkins, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The Auditor General identified a number of board members who had conflicts of interest. The one who had by far the most in the Auditor General's list was Andre-Lise Matot. Her firm, which she founded in 2009, called Cycle Capital, which is a firm that invests in clean technology or green technology based in Quebec, has had considerable business. So the Green Slush Fund is a little over $1 billion since its inception, and around, including those identified by the Auditor General and other ones that Andre-Lise Matot identifies on her own website that she's invested in. The total so far is, are you waiting for it? $250 million of Green Slush Fund money, a quarter of Green Slush Fund money, has gone into organizations, businesses that Cycle Capital has an investment interest in. Now, on the wonderful website that was in the news on the weekend called LinkedIn, you can find out wonderful and incredible information. And current Liberal Radical Environment Minister Guilbeault proudly lists that he was the strategic counsel for Cycle Capital for a decade before he was elected in 2019. And guess what he did in that role? He was the in-house paid lobbyist. And during his time as a paid lobbyist for Cycle Capital received $172 million of the $250 million that came out of the Green Slush Fund. And in the year and a half before Minister Guilbeault was elected in 2019, he lobbied PMO, and I said 25 times, according to the lobbyist register, on behalf of Cycle Capital for SDTC funds. Very successful lobbyist, obviously, and as part of Minister Guilbeault's reward, Minister Guilbeault got shares compensation in Cycle Capital. Those shares are not held in a blind trust. They are publicly available to see on his conflict of interest disclosure through the Ethics Commissioner's office. He still owns those shares. Since he joined Cabinet, Cycle Capital received $750 million of additional money in the dying days of Minister Navdeep Bain's time as the Minister of Industry. Minister Navdeep Bain, you'll recall, is now selling the largest and most expensive cell phones in the world at Rogers now as his reward for bringing down Rogers' cell phone rates. They rewarded him with a job to promote the most expensive cell phone company in the world. So he gave them $750 million while Minister Guilbeault was still in Cabinet. Then, for 40 months or so, while Minister Champagne was the minister, and had a senior assistant deputy minister in every investment committee and board meeting where 82% of the time they were voting conflicts of interest, including conflict of interest, declared conflicts of interest into companies that Andre-Lise Matot owned through Cycle Capital, which Minister Guilbeault has shares in to this day. That happened. So the line not only extends from the Prime Minister's office, who handpicked appointed the chair over her conflicts, even though they were warned about it. PCO has said that that's where it came from. And not only has the Prime Minister's office tried to thwart the House of Commons by asking departments to redact their documents from the disclosure the House of Commons asked for SDTC. We have an actual Minister of the Crown who happens to be the Minister of the Environment, which might have some interest in SDTC and its performance, who actually is financially gaining. And by that, I mean Cycle Capital, since Andre-Lise Matot was put on the board in 2016, tripled in value from $200 to $600 million. Pretty good return for all this. And as we know, because we've had lots of testimony on it, that when a company received a grant from SDTC, that was like a grant a stamp of approval from the Government of Canada, which allowed those companies to then go out and arrange for other funding, which they may have had difficulty getting. Not just funding from other parts of the government, but just general capital, raising capital. So I think Minister Guilbeault needs to attend our study. He was not on our original list, but the evidence has come up as a result of examination of his public disclosure. And I believe this committee, he needs to be accountable to this committee and testify as part of our ongoing examination. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you. As I said, I'm going to suspend just for 5 minutes now. When I come back, I'll hear from Ms. Khalid and then Mr. Erskine-Smith, and anyone else that wants to join the speaking roster. So we'll be back here in 5 minutes, please. This meeting is just suspended. into order. I do have extra time for this meeting. I'd ask you to consult with your whip offices if that's going to be a challenge. For the new members, I tend to run the clock the same way a European football referee does. Time is added, and we'll just proceed until the time is out. So at speaking list, I have first up Ms. Khalid. You have the floor, please, on the motion.
Thank you very much, Chair. And I'm just reviewing the text of the motion, and I can't help but think about how many different versions of the same motion that we've been trying to get through this committee. Specifically with respect to Minister Guilbeault, I know that last month we had voted and the motion did not pass to include Minister Guilbeault. I'm not sure what he has to contribute. And as I've been sitting here over these, I think it's been over 22 meetings that we've had on this specific issue, can't help but see how many repeated questions there are, how many it seems like your neighbor's, cousin's, friend's, dog's sitter is somehow related to what it is that we're studying here. And the fact that we are going down this path really makes me think about the government resources that we spend on this. Really makes me think about all of the extra redundancy that we're seeing on different committees, whether it's this one or an INDU or an OGO or so many others. And the Conservatives keep trying to tie this to the Prime Minister, and the fact that, over 22, 23, 24 meetings later, they still haven't been able to do so, I think is quite telling. And absolutely, we can go down this path, and I'm sure that Minister Guilbeault will come here. He'll have lots of great things to say. He'll have, I think, a good news story about how the clean tech sector is really propping up Canada's economy and how we're doing well in that sector. I think he'll have good news story to talk about how SDTC has over this decade been able to prop that sector, and how that transition is going to be good for transparency, is going to be good for accountability, and how it's going to be good for that sector. But I don't think that that's what the Conservatives really want to hear. I don't think they want to hear the good news stories at all. I think they're really in the mindset to find any way to tear Canada down, regardless of how they do it. And I think it's really disappointing in how and what they're trying to achieve here. There is no evidence. This committee is not a courtroom. We should leave it up to the people that make the decisions as to how this should happen, and leave it to their independence as to how this is going to happen. We are not in that business. We are in the business of ensuring what happens going forward. We are in the business of ensuring that there is increased transparency, that there is increased accountability, that we are doing right by our institutions and continuing to build public trust within our institutions and amongst Canadians as well. So I find that this motion is redundant. It has already been discussed and passed, and I'm surprised, Chair, that you did not rule it out of order, because it addresses the exact same issues that we have discussed here in the past over these past 23, 24 meetings that we've had now on this issue. And I'm hoping that we can move on to more important issues that this committee has on its agenda at this point in time. And I'm sure that Mr. Desjardins would agree that we do have some very important reports that we need to get to so that we can continue to do the work that Canadians expect us to do. And this is absolutely not it. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. But before I turn to Mr. Erskine-Smith, just I guess a flare I'll send up. I'm still not quite sure if this is going to be a quick matter or an extended matter. which means I'm just going to ask Ms. Morgan just to hang tight. After a few more members speak, I might seek consent to excuse you. But if members would like you to wait, you have to wait. Ms. Khalid, I'm going to. You can get back on the list if you like, Ms. Khalid. But I'm going to turn to Mr. Erskine-Smith now.
Thanks, Chair. Before I get to the substance of this, I had emailed you, Chair, previously raising concern around just the communication with members of this committee about extended time. We all have schedules, and I'm fine to take the time where I know that I've got the time and notice is given, and that's fine. But if the normal practice here is to, at the last minute, call an audible, like, you got to treat us with some basic respect and communicate to me as a member that this is going to happen. That is why notices are sent, Chair, and again, just like basic respect across the aisle. Now, substantively, Mr. Perkins had suggested that I'm new to this. I'm new to this. And so if there's proper corruption and there's evidence of that corruption, there's criminal wrongdoing, let's collectively get to the bottom of this across the aisle. Of course, let's do that. But when Mr. Perkins says, well, and the RCMP's opened an investigation, and then I go look into that claim, and what do I read? I read a statement from the RCMP that says the RCMP has concluded that the available reports do not identify any criminal offenses or evidence of criminal wrongdoing at this time. So on the one hand, okay, I'm told, well, there's an active investigation. I should take this seriously. And then I go and read what the RCMP has actually said, and they're saying the very same thing that I was saying at the outset that Mr. Perkins was trying to contradict. So, like, again, if we're going to work together to get to the bottom of something, let's come at it some semblance of good faith. But for example, like, I just sat through 2 hours of a witness being berated. A witness who does not have any conflicts. A witness who is new to this, who is coming to help us solve this problem, not someone who was involved in the creation of the problem. And we're berating her and treating this like it's a few good men because she doesn't know the answers to the NRC and what the NRC is going to do with the file when it's transitioned ultimately to them. It's absurd. I mean, either we deal with this in a sensible, reasonable, thoughtful way, or we deal with it like apparently we intend to deal with it, as I just watched for the last 2 hours. And yes, the witness could have been absolutely clearer about if a project isn't eligible, what is going to happen with it. There are categories here where ineligibility, conflicts, there are certain categories that we should have full disclosure of how does the board intend to deal with these things. But we could have a thoughtful, reasonable discussion with someone who wasn't part of the problem, and we could actively try to solve it together instead of berating them in the most inappropriate way. Now, as to this particular motion, I've got no real objection to this other than I would love to know why we're not hearing from, I think we already have Andre Lise Matteau on the witness list. I would have no objection to this, but for that it appears to be a fishing expedition. So I don't have any evidence in front of me that Gilbo has done anything untoward. I don't have any evidence in front of me to suggest that he's done anything wrong. I'm fine as far as if we're in the business of fishing expeditions, so be it. But it would make a lot more sense to me if we were dealing with this in a more thoughtful way is bring the witness Andre Lise Matteau, who I understand already be on the witness list, see what she has to say on behalf of her actions as a board member, but also vis-a-vis Cycle Capital Investments. And if anything comes up that would suggest that the minister should be involved in our investigation and our committee meetings, then so be it. But do we have any evidence in front of us at all that the minister has had a say in directed this arm's length organization to make decisions? Do we have any evidence of any conversations as between the minister and board members in relation to Cycle Capital Investments and the decision making in relation to distributing funds? Let's get to the bottom of this. But if it's bad faith fishing expeditions, let's call it what it is, because that's what this looks like to me. If we want to get to the bottom of this, let's hear from the witness who was the board member who has a beneficial interest in Cycle Capital Investments, and let's get to the bottom of that first.
Thank you very much. Suivant, c'est Mr. Drouin, s'il vous plaît.
Yeah, I just, if you recall, a few meetings ago, I said I had no problems with looking at this particular matter, even though my personal opinion, I thought that after an Auditor General's report, after a McCarthy-Tetra report, after another RCGT report, 22 meetings later, we're still looking at it. I mean, I don't know what Canadians think about this, but we're either the most incompetent auditors on earth, or we're actually going to get serious about this. So I'm just wondering, again, how many meetings, more meetings, after we've already agreed to a plan? Now we're gone to this, I know it's hunting season, but a wild goose chase to have the Minister Guilbeault, Monsieur Guilbeault, venir in front of our community. Pourquoi? What is the allegations here? I mean, unless Mr. Perkins knows something that I don't, then provide evidence to this committee. Because SDTC, as he fully well knows, and unless he doesn't know the cabinet process, but I know he knows, he's worked in government before, he fully understands that cabinet did not make individual decisions on contribution agreements for SDTC. He knows that. He also knows that Minister Guilbeault had nothing to do with that. So I'm here, again, trying to be serious, and if we are to get to this bottom of this, and I'm not saying there was any wrongdoing, we know there was, but it's the linkage that they're trying to make with every single minister or something that has Liberal. I can notice that they like to repeat corruption, Liberal over and time again. Nice, they probably get brownie points for that, I suspect, in
Gold stickers.
Yeah, maybe gold stickers, or I don't know. Or they're vowing for a cabinet position at some point. But anyways, all I'm trying to say is, can we be serious about this? I will not be supporting a motion that invites Minister Guilbeault based on nothing. I mean, maybe, hey, I have some mutual funds that I've declared to the conflict of interest. I don't know if they invest in, what's the company called? Cycle Capital? Maybe I should appear in front as a witness. Like, on s'en va où avec ça? I'm just asking, how many more meetings are we going to have? Are we going to actually be serious about this? Or are we going to continue this committee? Because this committee used to do good work. It used to do, and then it got too partisan. Et maintenant, on se retrouve avec
And now we're here with these types of investigations that make no sense. Since I got here over the past 4 meetings, nobody on the opposition, not the Conservatives, the Bloc, or the NDP have taught me anything new. Like, I've gotten no zero information. Are you going to... They're waiting for the report and they don't know anything. And now, who gave you your briefings to get here before appearing before the committee? I mean, can we do serious work? We're here to do work. And without going off on these partisan goose hunts, today's Minister Guilbeault, even if the committee already made the decision in the past to take his name off the list, the decision was already made in the past, and now we're going to maybe have to re-invite him, knowing that the opposition very well know that he has nothing to do with this, but they want to be able to say, oh, the minister didn't want to appear, he refused to appear. Come on. So thank you.
Merci beaucoup. Suivant. Next is Ms. Khalid again. You have the floor.
I think I'll perhaps yield to Ms. Yip.
Oh. Actually, it's Mr. Perkins and Ms. Yip.
Sure,
So,
that's
Mr.
fine.
Perkins, you have the floor, please.
Just for the record, the study began in this committee in June.
Mr. Perkins, just 1 second. Mr. Erton-Smith, is your hand up at Speak Again, or is that a previous hand up?
It's to speak again. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Very good. Mr. Perkins, you have the floor. Sorry, Mr. Perkins, I'm going to interrupt you because I know you're never lost at a loss for words, and you'll pick it right up again. Could I have unanimous consent to excuse Ms. Morgan, please?
Sure.
So
Sure.
if I need to hear yes or no's.
Yes.
Very good. Ms. Morgan, if you could just hang tight, please. You had a point of order, Mr. Desjardins.
I just wanted to provide some relief to our witness who, under the same advisement, so I thought it would be good to just dismiss our witness.
Mr.
That's okay.
Perkins, you have the floor. You from the top, please.
The Liberals are saying that there's 22 meetings. I know it's hard for them to keep their scandals straight. I think they're talking about Arrive scam. This study began in June. This is the 8th meeting, not the 22nd meeting. 22 is the Arrive scam stuff. So just to answer the issue, just to answer a few of the questions, perhaps I'll start. I understand all this information is publicly available. It's easy for MP Drouin or MP Nathan Erskine-Smith to do a little bit of homework and actually go out and find these issues out, as I have done over the last year. Since all of these companies, they're listed, as we've said earlier, that SDTC has given money from on their website, and it's very easy to go and check not only the Auditor General's report, but check the Cycle Capital list of ownership and cross-reference them. It's not difficult. It's there. And while Ms. André-Lise Matteau was on the board, $114 million went to companies. Now, we're talking about just while she was on the board, it's over 10% of the funds. And I know MP Erskine-Smith is reading from old information, so I'll update you, MP Erskine-Smith. Last Thursday, outside of the foreign interference inquiry, the RCMP commissioner was scrummed. That resulted in an article in the National Post on Friday and the Toronto Star on Saturday. But I'll read to you the transcript from his quote. He was asked about what is he doing with the documents. Can you tell me what you've done with them? And Commissioner Duhaime said, the investigation is ongoing, so I'll limit my comments to that. The reporter asked again, is there an investigation? And he said, yes, we just confirmed that. So I know that perhaps the MP's information is old, but this is the latest status. It was in the papers. You couldn't have missed it on the weekend. I know MP Erskine-Smith reads the Toronto Star. He would have seen it there, at least on Saturday. I don't know about the National Post, if he reads that, but it was in on Friday. The reporter...
Yeah, I read both, by the way, Rick.
Oh, good. Thank you. Thank you. Well, I know, but those articles were in there. The RCMP commissioner referred to those. So, and the fact is that, I'll say it again, you want to know why we're asking again for the minister. The minister discloses, as he should, on his public disclosure documents as a member of parliament and as a cabinet minister, that he still owns shares. The normal course of business for most ministers would be, if you're made the environment minister, you would sell shares in companies that you have a potential perceived or direct conflict of interest in. He did not do that. He still owns the shares. And this government has given more money, significant money, to the very fund that has where that company has received almost a quarter of the $1 billion into companies they own. Like, if you can't see that there's a blatant conflict of interest there, when the minister sat in cabinet and they gave another $750 million to the Green Slush Fund, and the minister was sitting in cabinet when that happened, and he owned shares in the company that's gotten 25% of all the money, I think we need to ask him questions about that. And that's why we've put this forward.
Thank you, Mr. Perkins. Ms. Yip, please.
Can you hear me? Okay, sorry about that. So I'll just say again that Minister Guilbeault, neither him nor his department have any involvement with SDTC or its mandate. And SDTC was at arm's length. And are the Conservatives suggesting the Minister of Environment was taking decisions or influencing decisions on an arm's length board? There's been no testimony from witnesses related regarding to Mr. Guilbeault saying that he has been involved or on any matters related to SDTC. So I'm not sure why the committee continues on this vein except to provide more social media fodder. So as Mr. Perkins has noted, it's been 8 studies on STDC, and I would rather us turn to our attention to the outstanding Auditor General reports, of which there are many. And soon the Auditor General will table new reports, and we need to return to our work at hand.
Thank you very much, Ms. Yip. Going back to Mr. Erskine-Smith, please. You have the floor.
Just, I suppose, a point of clarification for Mr. Perkins. So, is the suggestion here that the minister is a shareholder and he used his influence as a minister, exerting his influence over the arm's length STTC board? Or is it, I heard him articulate it differently just now. There was sort of past funding decisions where Cycle Capital had, I don't know, it's obviously not a 25% stake that they've got in the funding, but you're suggesting that 25% of the funding decisions, Cycle has some stake in those entities, I think is how you're describing it. And so the idea being that Guilbeault should have known SDTC is a big funder of companies that Cycle Capital has stakes in, and therefore he should have recused himself from increasing the funding of STC itself? I'm just trying to follow the thread here of the conflict and what the conflict allegation is.
Thank you very much, Mr. Erskine-Smith. Ms. Khalid, you have the floor, please.
Thanks very much, Chair. And I do understand that there are still a number of witnesses that we have yet to hear from with respect to this. I also understand that the RCMP has been very clear in that they don't want committees like this to interfere with their ongoing investigations. They don't need the butting in of the important work that they do. And quite frankly, I mean, what happens after, you know, we hear from XYZ witnesses here in this committee? What are we going to do with that information? Is tainted, because I've seen how Conservatives treat witnesses at this committee. I've seen just how much of a horrible time they get put through when they come before this committee. I've seen businesses go through the ringer when Conservatives, whether it's this committee or any other committees, go through and interrogate them like they were in a courtroom. This is not a courtroom. This is a place where we make policy decisions, where we provide recommendations to the Government of Canada as to how we are going to conduct our business going forward, how we can improve the business that we conduct going forward. So having all of these witnesses on the list that are going to be invited to this committee, I'm not sure why we need to suffer motion after motion that have literally zero impact on what we're trying to achieve here. And what we're trying to achieve here, Chair, and I'll remind you and our committee members, all of us, is that we're trying to find a better process for ensuring that the clean tech sector can have the support that it needs to support Canada's economy, to grow Canada's economy, and for that to happen in a transparent and an accountable fashion, taking into account what Canadian taxpayer dollars are actually paying for. There has been wrongdoing. I think none of us on this committee disagree with that. There has been wrongdoing. But what are we going to do about it? Are we going to go down the rabbit hole? Are we going to try to, hold a kangaroo court here in this committee? Or are we actually going to find some reasonable, sustainable, concrete solutions that are going to help in fixing the problem? And I think that we can be those people that are going to fix the problem rather than going down whatever avenue, whatever court the Conservatives want us to go down. Mr. Perkins spoke about his leader and how he's so, really into this issue. Well, what's another issue, and Mr. Perkins did allude to this, is foreign interference. And it would be so great for the leader of the opposition to finally get his security clearance so he can understand what kind of shenanigans are going on within his own party in terms of foreign interference.
Relevance?
Yeah,
well, you brought it up, Mr. Perkins.
I never mentioned my leader once. Never mentioned him once. You can't make stuff up.
All right,
Oh, is that how it
works? Mr. Perkins, Ms. Clayton, I would gently guide you back to the motion at hand.
And that's exactly my point, Mr. Chair, is that we can throw whatever spaghetti at the wall. I would have used another term, but I know it's not parliamentary. But whatever spaghetti we can throw at the wall and see if it sticks or not. Has it cooked enough? Have we found out enough things that we can perhaps, add as sauce to the spaghetti that may or may not stick to the wall? Well, the reality of the matter is there are so many people that support us in these committee meetings. There are so many resources that go into these committee meetings. There have been phenomenal reports that hold the government to account by the Auditor General that are pending our review, that are pending our recommendations, and yet here we are, meeting after meeting after meeting, chasing after geese. And I don't think that that's appropriate, Mr. Chair. I think that we need to do better things with how we conduct ourselves. If there is an RCMP investigation, let the independent RCMP conduct their investigation. It's not like we're going anywhere. We're right here. We'll come back to it if that needs to be a point to come back to. But at this point in time, why do we continue to waste our time? Why do we continue to try to pressure this committee through these motions that are redundant, that we hear from again and again and again with the same topic again and again and again, that don't lead anywhere? They literally just don't get us to where we need to go. And so, Chair, like I would encourage my conservative colleagues to withdraw their motion and maybe come back to it once we've heard from all of the witnesses that are on the list. Maybe come back to it once we've realized that the RCMP has done whatever investigation they need to do. Because this makes no sense to me at this point in time. And I don't think that our committee should be spending any more taxpayer dollars going through this process. I don't think that our committee should be wasting any of our precious time going through this process. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Mr. Drouin.
I think our committee should get a portion of the percentage the Conservatives are doing fundraising off of this issue. I think we could be self-sustainable, Mr. Chair. But more seriously, my question would be to Mr. Perkins, the author of the motion, is to, we have an officer of Parliament who's responsible to look after these matters, and yet we chose a drive-by shooting, essentially, drive-by smear, on this particular issue. So we're not interested in, I know he's not interested in asking Minister Guilbeault questions. There will be a 5-minute preamble and a yes or no question at some point. I've seen the modus operandi on the other side, but my question is, I don't understand why this, if he has evidence or so-called evidence, why wouldn't he send that to the Conflict of Interest Ethics or the Ethics Commissioner? That's why we have an Officer of Parliament, to look after these matters in a non-partisan way. If the Ethics Commissioner decides that there was a conflict, then maybe we would entertain the witness list. But I know for a fact the Ethics Commissioner probably won't look at the evidence that Mr. Perkins is claiming as evidence. But I would strongly encourage him to send a letter to the Ethics Commissioner, and perhaps, as my colleague Ms. Khalid proposed, that once if we do get a response from the Ethics Commissioner, then we could entertain adding more names to the list. But right now, the name that one of the name is already on the list, André Lizotte, and but we're not supporting Minister Guilbeault being here in front of our committee because, as we've said, I don't think it's going to add any value to our committee, and I'm sure we are all respectful of each other's time. So let's make sure that the witnesses that come before here are actually adding value to our study. Merci.
Thank you very much. Clerk, please call the question.
Shall the motion of Mr. Perkins carry? Monsieur Drouin.
No.
Mr. Erskine-Smith.
No.
Ms. Khalid. No. Mr. Long. No. Ms. Yip.
No.
Mr. Nader.
Yes.
Mr. McCauley. Mr. Perkins.
Sorry, Mr. McCauley, can you show us your vote again? Yeah, thumbs up on Mr. McCauley, just for everyone who's not on Zoom.
Mr. Perkins.
Yes.
Madame Sinclair Desgagnés.
Oui.
Mr. Desjardins.
Yes.
Very good. The motion is passed, and I'll ask Ms. Morgan if she could take her seat at the end of the witness table, and I'll turn things over to Ms. Yip. It's just as soon as you're settled there, but do take your time.
It's
Oh.
Mr.
My apologies, Mr. Erskine-Smith. The time is yours, not Ms. Yipps. Pardon me, I misread my paper. If you're ready, Mr. Erskine-Smith, you have the floor for 5 minutes, please, just to conclude questions to Ms. Morgan, and then we'll wrap things up.
Thanks very much. I suppose I want to start with the different categories of review that you'll be doing and the different categories of project, I should say, that'll fall under your review. There will be some projects that were eligible, that there were no conflicts, and you can restart that funding, and it's been a detriment to those companies that haven't had the opportunity to access funds. Where a project has been deemed ineligible, though, and there was no conflict, I mean, that's one category. There would be others where they are eligible and there was a conflict, but the conflict was declared and there were proper processes undertaken. And then there are other categories, and this is, I think, why maybe some members have expressed frustration today. It's not enough, I think, to say treat it on a case-by-case basis, because we know actually that there are these pretty standard categories that different companies will fall into. In a case where there is a conflict, for example, and it was inappropriate that funding was distributed, there's no fraud per se on the company's part. There's no wrongdoing per se on the company's part, but there's impropriety in the allocation nonetheless, and that should be addressed. And so I think it would be helpful, and you may not have an answer today, and I'm not going to say, yes or no, demand an answer as far as it goes. I actually really appreciate the work that people do to come in and fix a situation like this after the fact, and especially someone like yourself who is not conflicted and has subjected yourself to 2 hours of this nonsense, despite the fact you're there to clean up the mess, which we should be, I think working alongside you in doing so. But I do think it falls short to say we're going to deal with it on a case-by-case basis and be so vague. So can you commit to you not coming back in person, but I think there does have to be some communication from the board to us in writing to outline what that process is in a clearer way. And again, I think case-by-case is insufficient. To outline at some point, it doesn't have to be tomorrow, but what the expectation is of the board and what the advice is from the experts that you're consulting with as to how you're going to deal with these different distinct categories.
Yes, Mr. Chair, thank you for the question. There were, in the Auditor General's report, there were 2 ecosystem projects, for example, that were clearly deemed to be ineligible, and the board took action immediately to cease funding for ecosystem projects because the Auditor General determined that ecosystem projects in general were not eligible under the contribution agreement. There were also issues regarding approval of the seed funding programs, primarily around the governance and approval process, and so those have also been stopped by the board, and that program will be transferred, we expect, to the National Research Council. And then in the case of the startup funding, there are obviously different categories, as the member indicated, Mr. Chair, including a category where the Auditor General has reviewed and not found any issues of ineligibility. Then there are category where the Auditor General did find eligibility issues. They noted that they did not perform a technological assessment of projects and therefore did request that each project, all of the projects under this entire period, be reviewed one by one. But of course there will be different categories, and as I noted in terms of funding restart, we're looking on a priority basis at the projects where we have companies that have met their agreements, and we'll be looking at those as a first step. So kind of prioritizing the companies where they are in progress on projects and where funding has been paused. And, I think that as those go forward, then we'll be able to work on the restart. So
it all makes sense. The only thing I'll say to that, and I appreciate the having to review them one by one and review them case by case, but ultimately the object of that review is to then sort them into a category. And so I think the frustration you're getting in some ways is because when where there is a decision, for example, that is subject to a conflict, where there is, for example, a failure to recuse, and the ethics commissioner finds or would find if reviewing every single case that this was improper in terms of its approval, then it's important for us to know how that category is going to be dealt with. And it's not enough to say, well, in this particular case, in that particular case, they're unique. No, the problem will be the same. It might be a different company, might be different merit to the company, but the problem, the fundamental conflict problem may well be the same. And I think it would be helpful for this committee, and again, it may not be clear in your mind yet as to all those categories and what the process is for each category. But I think it would be helpful for us to understand, and there wouldn't be, I think, so much yes or no back and forth if we properly understood it. And I think the only other thing I would leave you with, and it would be helpful for this committee, there is that one company in our store that did receive funds that we know was subject to an issue where the individual should have recused, and instead they abstained. Not criminal wrongdoing, Mr. Perkins, but nonetheless an ethics violation. And so in that particular case, that's emblematic of one category. And so how one deals with that will suggest how one deals with other category, with other like-minded cases as well. And so it'd be good for us to know in writing at some point how the board intends to deal with that particular case.
Thank you. Ms. Morgan, you have the last word, if any, please. Over to you without interruption.
I have nothing to add.
Okay,
Thank
good.
You,
well,
Mr.
I appreciate then Mr. Erskine Smith was quite clear then on his request, and we'll leave that with you. Just a few points before we end things up here. I do want to thank you, Ms. Morgan, for coming in today and for being so patient while we dealt with some sudden committee business and your assistance today in relation to this study. There's been several requests for information from you and your team. If you could endeavor to provide that. Generally, we like to have responses back to this committee in about 3 weeks to be in a position to review them. And as I said, please be as forthcoming and as transparent as you can. And should you find there's a roadblock, please state that so we have a sense of why you might not be able to answer or provide as fulsome as answers as we might like to take that up. I just want to note before I look for your consent that on Wednesday I'm going to start the meeting at 4:15 instead of 4:30. Mr. Baines has agreed to appear, but he has some scheduling conflicts. Knowing as well the state of the chamber with respect to votes, I don't expect any on Wednesday, so we're going to begin at 4:15. That notice will likely go out today. We're just waiting for some paperwork on that, but I wanted to give you all as much of a heads up as possible. Looking then for your permission to adjourn this meeting. Yes, thank you. Meeting adjourned.